nights when the mind will not stop talking. It rehearses the day, argues with people who aren't in the room, circles back through the same worry it visited an hour ago, and then again 20 minutes after that. You lie in the dark and the voice inside doesn't pause, doesn't lower itself, doesn't seem to know that the body needs rest. And yet somewhere beneath all of that noise, something is already listening, not waiting for the noise to stop, not trying to answer it, just present, just here. A quiet, open awareness that has been here all along, hearing everything and holding it all, the way a large room holds sound without being disturbed by it. Tonight, we explore what may be the oldest and deepest teaching across Buddhist traditions, the art of deep hearing. The practice of listening not as a tool to gather information, but as a way of coming home to the stillness that never left you. Across 10 complete journeys from the forest monasteries of ancient India, to the mountain hermitages of Korea, to the rivers of Vietnam, to the great meditation halls of China and Japan, we will meet monks and farmers, scholars and hermits, women who cracked open their practice through a single sound, and masters who offered silence as their most complete teaching. This video offers contemplative stories inspired by Buddhist wisdom, created for rest and reflection, not medical or therapeutic advice. If your eyes grow heavy at any point tonight, allow them to close. You don't need to stay awake to receive what is being offered here. Wisdom enters through rest as much as through attention. Find the weight of your body against whatever holds you. Notice the temperature of the air as it arrives at your nose. And just for a moment before we begin, simply listen to whatever is already sounding in your world right now. Not to identify it, not to judge it, just to hear. Something in you already knows how to do this. Let it begin. The rains had come early to Savatthi that year. By the third week of the monsoon season, the Great Market Road had turned to red mud, the kind that swallowed sandals and released them with a sucking reluctance that made novice monks laugh and senior monks pretend not to notice. The mango groves around the Jetavana monastery dripped and steamed. Frogs called from every ditch. The smell of wet earth rose so thickly through the night that it seemed to have weight, a dense mineral presence pressing against the skin like a second robe. In the main hall of Jetavana, lamps of sesame oil cast pools of amber light on the faces of 500 monks settled into the stillness of evening practice. Rain drummed on the roof, tiles in waves, first distant, then close, then distant again, as though the sky were breathing. The palm leaf manuscripts in their lacquered boxes, the water bowls filled and waiting on the offering shelf, the butter lamps whose flames bent sideways when the air shifted at the doorway. All of this was ordinary. All of this was known. All of this belonged to a life that had been freely chosen and daily renewed. In the far corner of the hall, half screened by a carved pillar, sat a young monk named Ananda. He was perhaps 30 years old, though he carried himself with the uncertain alertness of someone much younger, someone still learning how to be fully present in a body, how to let the eyes rest rather than search, how to breathe without bracing for the next thing. His robe was clean but carelessly arranged, one shoulder slightly exposed in a way that his teacher, Belatasisa, had mentioned 3 times without visible effect. His hands were folded in his lap, but not quite settled. One thumb moved slowly back and forth against the other, as though practicing a small, private reassurance. He had been a monk for 8 years. He had sat through 100 monsoons. He had memorized the 7 books of the Abhidhamma and recited back to his teacher entire sutras spoken 6 months prior without dropping a syllable. And yet, on this particular evening, something in him would not be still. It was not the thunder. He had long since stopped noticing thunder. It was the question. 3 days ago, a senior monk named Upali had asked Ananda a simple thing in passing, so casual it could almost have been ignored. "You are always listening, Ananda, always so close to the teacher. But do you understand what you hear?" Upali had walked on without waiting for an answer, which was perhaps the point. The question had been a gift wrapped in the shape of a slight, and Ananda had been carrying it since, turning it over the way a tongue worries at a loose tooth. "Do you understand what you hear?" He knew the answer that was expected of him. Yes, of course. He was praised in the assembly for his memory, for the capacity that his teachers called gati, the ability to perceive the internal coherence of a teaching, the way its parts connected and flowed, the way a long discourse moved like a river from one understanding to the next. He could repeat back discourses of 60,000 words without dropping a syllable. He had been told this was rare. He had been told this was a gift from many past lives of devotion. But Upali's question had not asked about memory. It had asked about understanding. And when Ananda sat with that question in the silence of the rain-soaked hall, he felt something he recognized as honesty. He did not always know the difference. He had come to the Buddha's side, somewhat reluctantly. In fact, in the 20th year of the teacher's ministry, the Buddha had gathered all the monks at Savatthi and announced that he was growing old and wished to have a permanent attendant, someone who would walk beside him always, arrange his robe, prepare his seat, carry word to those who wished to come and teach, and relay to him any concerns of the community. Every monk in the hall had immediately raised a hand except Ananda, who sat quietly at the back and looked at the floor with what he hoped was an expression of modesty rather than the subtle panic he actually felt. "The Buddha knows best who to choose," he said later, when asked. But the truth was more complicated. Ananda had, at that point, spent 8 years doing exactly what he loved most, listening. Not attending, not arranging, not managing, just listening. He would sit behind pillars, or at the edges of courtyards, or in the shade of the mango grove where the teaching was often given, and he would receive the Buddha's words the way the earth receives rain, without intention, without effort, just open. He was afraid that becoming the attendant would change this. That proximity would become a kind of occupation, that the need to be useful to hand the water bowl, to send word to the visiting merchant who wished a private teaching, to walk at the correct distance, neither too close nor too far, would fill the space where listening had been. When the Buddha turned and looked at him directly, with that expression that was at once entirely ordinary and somehow completely unbearable, Ananda had felt the choice made for him before he made it. He stepped forward. He set his 8 conditions: that he would take no gifts for himself, no special food, that he would transfer every invitation to the teacher, that if he missed a discourse, it would later be repeated to him privately, that he could bring any sincere seeker to the Buddha's presence regardless of their caste or position. The Buddha accepted these conditions with a smile that contained, Ananda had always thought, a knowledge of something the younger man could not yet see. 25 years he had served. 25 years of walking behind, of sleeping outside the door, of being the one through whom all things passed to reach the teacher and from whom all things received the teaching to carry away. He had learned to carry water without spilling it on rough ground. He had learned to tell which of the master's silences invited approach and which were walls. He had learned, in ways that had no language yet, to be a vessel. But a vessel, he understood now, in the wet darkness of the monsoon hall, was not the same as someone who truly heard. The rain intensified. A lamp guttered and recovered. In the morning, Ananda resolved he would go to the teacher. He had done this many times and always found a way to circle the real question with easier ones. Tonight, holding Upali's words in his chest, he decided he would not circle. He would simply ask, "What is the difference between hearing and understanding? I have heard everything. But do I hear?" He arrived at the teacher's dwelling at first light, when the mist still lay in flat white layers between the trees and the wet grass released its smell of green and cold. The Buddha was already awake, as always seated in the doorway of his simple room with his eyes half closed, hands resting in his lap, breathing with a quietness so complete it seemed less like the absence of movement than the presence of something settled and vast. Ananda arranged his robe, bowed, sat. He said, "Teacher, I have a question that has kept me awake for 3 nights." The Buddha waited. "Upali asked me whether I understand what I hear. And when I sat with the question honestly, I could not say yes with certainty. I know the words. I know the order. I know where each discourse was given, and to whom, and in what weather. But sometimes, teacher, when I repeat the words, when I recite, as I will at the council one day, I feel that I am a very accurate river, that the water passes through me and reaches its destination without being changed. And I wonder if that is enough. I wonder if hearing, for me, has become so practiced, so reliable, that it no longer opens anything." The Buddha looked at him for a long moment. Then he said something Ananda had not expected. "What do you hear right now?" Ananda paused. He listened. He said, "Birds. The sound of water falling from the roof. Someone sweeping the path near the eastern gate. My own breathing," the Buddha said. "And are you adding anything to those sounds? Are you naming them, storing them, arranging them into a sequence you will later recall?" Ananda was honest. "A little, yes." "Then try once more. This time, hear only. Do not reach forward to store. Do not reach backward to compare. Let the sound arrive and remain only as long as it remains." Ananda tried. The sound of water from the roof became, for a moment, not a sound he could name, but something prior to its name, a texture, a presence, something arriving and departing in the same instant. The bird call lost its species, lost its location in the mango grove, lost its association with every other bird call he had ever filed away in the great library of his memory, and became just a sound in the air. Complete. Already over. Something in his chest loosened very slightly. He said, "That is different." The Buddha said, "Yes." They sat together as the mist burned away and the sun made its first appearance through the trees, thin and gold and slanted. The Buddha spoke in the unhurried way that Ananda had come to love, the voice that never gathered speed regardless of its content, that moved through the most shattering teachings with the same pace as instructions for washing a bowl. There are 2 kinds of listening, Ananda. The first takes what it hears and adds it to what it already holds. It is a form of collecting. It is not wrong, the teaching must be preserved, and you have preserved it faithfully, and this is a great kindness to the world. But you know already that this kind of listening never quite empties. It only fills. The second kind of listening, and here the teacher paused for a moment, not for effect, but for precision, begins before thought arrives. It meets the sound before the mind has decided what the sound means. It is the hearing that hears the bell before the word bell appears. It is the awareness that receives without immediately owning. Savakas hearers, we call them that, not because they have better ears than other people. We call them that because they have learned to hear in this second way, to remain in the moment of reception long enough to be changed by what they receive. A truly good hearer does not emerge from a teaching unchanged, not because the teaching is different, but because the hearing is complete. Ananda held this. After a time he said, "Then my memory, all those thousands of discourses, is it wrong? Is it not true hearing?" The Buddha smiled again. That same smile from 25 years ago, the one containing foreknowledge. It is not wrong. It is, in fact, necessary. You are going to be needed. Ananda. After I am gone, and I am going. You know this, the community will need someone who holds what was spoken. The words must survive until the words can be set down in a form that doesn't require one particular human body to carry them. You are doing something essential. But there is a gift that accurate memory can sometimes obstruct. He paused. When you know you will remember perfectly, you can hold yourself slightly apart from what you hear. A small distance, barely noticeable. The distance of the archivist rather than the receiver. And from that distance, some things cannot reach you. Ananda felt the precision of this. The slight pain of being understood so exactly. So what do I do? Listen as though you will forget. The Buddha said simply, listen as though this moment is the only moment this teaching will ever exist. As though when the sound fades, it will be gone, not into your memory, but into silence. Let it matter. Let it land. And then let it pass. You will find that what remains not in memory, but in the body, in the very cells of your practice, is deeper than anything you could have deliberately stored. Ananda left the teacher's dwelling and walked back through the Jetavana grove in the freshly washed morning. The mist was entirely gone now. The grove was full of light slanting between trunks, finding the moving water in the streams that crossed the path, catching on the edges of leaves still holding last night's rain. Around him the monastery was waking, the clatter of water bowls being collected. A group of novices moving toward the meditation hall in a line. The smell of rice porridge from the kitchen fire. He heard all of it. Not perfectly. Not with the completeness of a vessel receiving and storing. More like he walked slowly now, reaching for the right understanding, more like a presence attending to a presence. The sound of the water arriving and being received and releasing. The smell of the rice existing for a moment in his awareness with the simplicity of a fact that required no further action. Something he had always known was perhaps, today, beginning to be understood. That evening, before the assembly, he sat once more in his corner of the meditation hall and let the rain begin its return. He did not prepare to remember it. He did not name it. He let it come, and in the space between one raindrop sound and the next, he found something he had been sitting beside for 25 years without quite touching, a quiet, already present awareness that received everything and held nothing. An openness that had, apparently been his all along. Eva Mesutaya. He would one day begin. Thus have I heard. But sitting in the rain of Savatthi, with the lamps bending in the moving air and the tree frogs calling without self-consciousness from every wet shadow, he understood for the first time what that sentence actually meant. Not, I stored this accurately, but I was here. I received this. It passed through me and changed me. And what remains is not the record, but the fact of having truly listened. Let your breath settle now, just slightly deeper than before. Feel where your body meets the bed or floor or cushion, the particular warmth of that contact. The way gravity asks nothing of you except to rest. You have been listening tonight for as long as you have been alive. Longer, perhaps. And yet there is a kind of listening available to you right now, not the gathering kind, not the storing kind, but the simple, effortless kind that Ananda discovered in a rain-soaked grove in ancient India. You don't have to do anything with what you hear. The sound of this voice, the small sounds of your room, your own breathing, soft and unhurried, they don't need to be stored. They don't need to be understood. They only need to arrive and pass and be received in the way the rain receives itself as it falls, not going anywhere particular, not trying to become anything other than what it already is. Just this sound, just this breath, just this moment of hearing. And as that understanding lands somewhere quieter than thought, as Ananda's discovery makes its way from those ancient Savatthi rains down through 25 centuries to find you here, resting, we travel onward now, across the water and the years, to a mountain in China where a teacher offers a lesson in hearing that his student will not find in any text, in any hall, in any rain-washed morning, a lesson delivered not in words, but in silence. The mountains of Jiangxi had a way of making a person feel they had never quite arrived. You walked for 3 days through pine forest. The path, sometimes barely visible beneath fallen needles. And when at last you crested a ridge and saw the valley with its temple buildings half hidden in morning cloud, you felt not the satisfaction of destination but something more unsettling, the sensation that the walking itself had been the thing. And that arrival was only the place where you would begin waiting to leave again. Dongshan arrived at the monastery of Master Yunyan Tansheng in the spring of his 31st year, during the tail end of a season that had not yet decided whether to release its cold. The plum trees had bloomed and passed. The hillsides were the particular yellow-green of early growth that looks almost luminous in certain lights, as though the leaves have not yet forgotten the gold they began as. Along the streams, which were running full and fast with snowmelt from higher elevations, small frogs sat on the wet rocks and did not move when he passed, as though they understood that a monk with a traveling bundle and dusty sandals posed no immediate danger to the life of a frog. He had been traveling and studying for 11 years. Dongshan had spent those years the way serious students spend them in relentless, sometimes desperate seeking. He had trained under masters who spoke in riddles, masters who shouted, masters who threw their sandals, masters who answered his deepest questions with a cup of tea and an expression of mild indifference. He had memorized sutras and then been told to throw away sutras. He had achieved states of remarkable stillness and been told the stillness was the obstacle. He had wept in meditation halls at 2 a.m. with the absolute certainty that he was failing at the only thing that mattered. And he had woken the next morning to find the certainty was still there, but the weeping had gone. replaced by something quieter and less named. He came to Yunyan because of a question that had been following him like a second shadow for 3 years. He had tried to shake it by burying himself in practice. He had tried to answer it with logic. He had brought it to 2 different teachers, both of whom had given him answers that satisfied him for exactly as long as it took to walk from the interview room back to the meditation hall, at which point the question had simply reasserted itself with increased patience. The question was this: the teaching says that the inanimate preach the Dharma. The rocks preach it. The streams preach it. The very air moving through the pine forest preaches it. But if that is true, if wisdom is not confined to people and texts and teachings but is present in everything, always, then why can I not hear it? What prevents a person from hearing what is everywhere and constant and has never for a moment stopped speaking? Yunyan Tansheng was a small man with eyebrows that curved upward at their outer edges in a way that made him look permanently amused, though the amusement was entirely genuine and entirely without condescension. He had studied for 20 years under masters whose names were spoken with reverence in every monastery, from Hangzhou to the northern provinces. And what this long study had left him with was a quality of settled ease that visitors occasionally mistook for laziness until they sat with him in formal interview and discovered that his gentleness had edges. He received Dongshan in the guest hall, where a window faced east toward the ridge that turned violet at dusk. Dongshan bowed, arranged himself on the floor mat, and stated his question without preamble, which Yunyan noticed approvingly. Students who spent several minutes establishing their credentials before asking the thing they actually came to ask were students who were already protecting themselves against the answer. "Master," said Dongshan, "it is said that inanimate beings preach the Dharma. Is this true?" Yunyan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "It is true, but can people hear it?" Another pause. People cannot hear it. This was not what Dongshan had expected. He leaned slightly forward. Then who can hear it? Yunyan lifted his eyes and looked at the younger monk with an expression of such warm, patient precision that Dongshan would not find a name for it until years later. He said, "Inanimate beings can hear it." Dongshan sat with this for a long time. Long enough that the light in the window changed color and a monk came quietly to light the evening lamp. He could feel the answer working on something in him, not quite understanding it, but feeling it like pressure on a door that hasn't yet opened. He bowed and left. He stayed for 4 months at Yunyan's monastery. He rose before light for morning practice. He worked in the garden through the morning heat. He sat for long hours in the meditation hall where the stone walls held the cold even in summer, and the smell of incense was so old and deep it had become part of the stone itself. He attended Yunyan's teaching sessions, which were brief and often puzzling, and he spent his evenings walking the paths between the buildings with the question Yunyan had returned to him, turned slightly on its axis. Inanimate beings can hear it. He took it apart, looking for condescension or deflection, and found neither. He took it apart, looking for a koan trick, some paradox engineered to dislodge a fixed idea, and found something that felt less like a manufactured puzzle and more like a statement of direct, unsentimental fact. He pressed on it with logic. He pressed on it with meditation. He pressed on it during meals, when he ate slowly and watched the steam rise from his bowl. One afternoon, in the 3rd month, he went to Yunyan and asked, "Master, when you say inanimate beings preach the Dharma, what sutra teaches this?" Yunyan replied, "It is said, water birds, tree groves, all without exception recite the Buddha's name. Recite the Dharma." Dongshan bowed and left again. He walked that evening to the stream below the monastery, where the water was moving fast over smooth grey stones, speaking in the low, continuous rush that streams make when they are not trying to be anything other than water moving over stone. He sat on the bank. He was not trying to listen. He was not making an effort. He was simply a man sitting on a stream bank in the late afternoon, with mud under his sandals and the smell of pine and wet earth in the air, and a question that had been living in him for 3 years, sitting also on the bank beside him. What happened next is difficult to describe. Not because it was dramatic, it was not dramatic in the way anyone standing at a distance would have noticed, but because it occurred in a register that didn't quite belong to ordinary experience. The sound of the stream was the same sound it always was. The stones were the same stones. The light on the water moved in the same small random patterns it always made when late sun cut across, moving water at a low angle. But Dongshan stopped adding to what he heard. For a moment, brief enough that he almost missed it. Long enough that it would never leave him. He heard the stream without the word stream. He heard the water without the memory of other water. He heard the sound before his mind had time to say this is a sound and store it in the category of things already known. He heard, for a single clear instant, the way water moves over stone when there is no one nearby who needs it to mean anything. And in that instant, the sound of the water was complete. Not beautiful in the way that is an opinion. Not peaceful in the way that is a preference. Complete in the way that a circle is complete, not lacking anything. Not reaching toward anything. Not arriving from anywhere. Simply and perfectly what it was. He sat very still. Then, slowly, the mind came back. The word stream returned. The categories reassembled. The quality of ordinary hearing resumed. But something had shifted. Like a bone that has been reset after a long displacement, the same bone, in the right place now. The pain of rightness more interesting than the old comfort of being wrong. He returned to Yunyan that evening. The master was in his room, seated by the window with its rectangle of darkening sky, holding a cup of tea in both hands, with the meditative purposelessness of a man who has given up pretending that what he does is separate from practice. Dongshan said, "I understand now what you meant." Yunyan waited. When you said inanimate beings can hear the Dharma, the inanimate preach, you were not speaking of rocks and streams as though they are humans with ears. You were pointing to the quality of hearing that is free from the hearer. When there is no one adding anything to the sound, no name, no judgment, no category, no one who hears, then the sound and the hearing are the same thing. The stream teaches the stream. The wind teaches the wind. There is no gap, no inside and outside, no one who must receive and someone who transmits. Yunyan looked at him for a long time. Then he said, "Possible. Just possible? This is Chan." Yunyan said, with the eyebrows rising again, "Possible is more than people think." Dongshan left the monastery 3 weeks later, just as the late summer heat was beginning to ease and the light was acquiring its September quality, still warm, but carrying within it the first intimation of something cooler to come. As he crossed the river below the village, he paused on the bridge and looked down at his reflection in the water. The reflection moved. The water moved. The face looking back from the moving surface was recognizable but not fixed, shifting with every ripple. Never quite the same configuration twice. Present and present and present, and then changed. He later composed a verse about this moment. Avoid seeking him in someone else, or he will be far from you. I now travel alone, and everywhere I encounter him, He is now the same as me, yet I am not him. You must understand that this is the way to merge with suchness. And in his notes, years later, he would write these words about the teaching of inanimate things, about the quality of hearing that lies beneath ordinary hearing, listening with your ears no sound. Hearing with your eyes, you directly understand. What Dongshan discovered at that stream bank in Jiangxi has taken 1,000 forms in 1,000 teachings, but its core remains simple enough to hold in one breath. The mind, when it hears, usually arrives before the sound does. It comes already knowing what it will hear, already carrying its categories, its names, its histories, its judgments about what is pleasant and what is not. And so what it receives is never quite the thing itself, but the thing as it expected it to be. A kind of echo heard in advance. This is not a failing unique to distracted or unspiritual people. It is simply how thought works. Thought is memory applied to the present. It is the past arriving early, rearranging the present to fit the shapes it already knows. But beneath this arriving early, there is another layer. There is hearing before thought. There is the moment of pure reception, the bare contact between awareness and sound before the sound becomes named, before it is filed, before it is liked or disliked. This is what Chan teachers called the original face, the nature that was present before birth, before conditioning, before the self was assembled from the materials of language and experience. This original hearing is not something you create. It is not something you achieve through effort. It is something you uncover, or rather, you stop covering it. You stop adding to the sound. You stop arriving before it. You let it come as it is, to what you are, before the categories close around it. This is what Yunyan meant when he said, inanimate beings can hear it. Not that rocks have ears, but that the quality of hearing which belongs to inanimate things, the hearing that is pure reception, pure presence, no agenda, no self that must make the sound mean something. This quality is available to you. It is the deepest layer of what you already are. Right now, wherever you are lying, there is sound. The sound of this voice, the small sounds of your room, a creak, a breath of air, something settling in the dark, the sound of your own breathing, which you may have stopped hearing hours ago because you began to take it for granted. Let the mind stop arriving before it. Let the sound come to you, the way water reaches the shore, not pulled, not pushed, just carried by the nature of things. Feel your body breathing. Feel the weight of your limbs. There is nothing required of you right now. No storing, no understanding, no arriving, only receiving. The way the stream receives the sky completely, effortlessly, without keeping anything. And as Dongshan's discovery moves through you like water through the cracks in stone, quiet, patient, finding every place it can go, we travel now across the sea to Japan, to a particular monastery in the mountains above Kyoto, where a young monk is discovering something that Dongshan would have recognized completely. He is discovering that the mind makes noise, and that the noise is not the problem. The winter that Bankei turned 23 was a winter that seemed to have been designed specifically to discourage the practice of patience. The small hut he had built for himself on the edge of a farm in Harima province had no paper on its windows and no proper seal on its door, which meant that the wind from the north moved through the space the way water moves through a cupped hand, present for a moment and then gone, taking warmth with it. He had boarded over the windows with planks he pulled from a broken fence, but the gaps between the boards admitted threads of grey winter light and, more importantly, threads of grey winter cold. And he had learned to sleep sitting up because the floor was too cold to lie on for more than an hour without waking. He had been doing this for 7 years. Before that, 6 years of wandering the provinces of Japan, Kyoto, Osaka, the southern tip of Kyushu. Back again, seeking teachers who could answer a question that had been living in him since childhood with the unreasonable tenacity of a splinter that works its way deeper rather than out. He had entered a Shingon temple at 15 and found it insufficient. He had trained with a Rinzai master at 16 and been given his monk's name, Yotaku, long polishing of the mind gem, and told to practice zazen and wait. He had practiced zazen and waited, and the question had not resolved itself. He had fasted. He had sat through sessions where the pain in his knees had seemed more articulate than any teaching he received. He had read texts and burned texts and read the ashes and found nothing in them either. The question, the one that had been following him since the age of 11, when he first encountered the Confucian phrase, bright virtue, and understood with immediate certainty that he did not understand it at all, had by now become less a question than a condition. It was the texture of his entire experience. A constant background pressure, neither sharp nor dull, but persistent in the way that gravity is persistent, not dramatic, not optional. And beneath the question, increasingly, was the body's own conversation with him. By his 23rd year, the conversation had become difficult to ignore. He was coughing, had been coughing for 8 months, the kind of cough that started deep in the chest and arrived in waves, sometimes waking him in the night, sometimes doubling him over during the meal he allowed himself each afternoon. He knew what it meant. He had grown up in a household that smelled of the medicines his father prepared for the sick and dying of the village, and he knew the smell of a chest that was losing its argument with winter. He had seen it before. He knew how it ended. He arranged himself against this knowledge the way he had arranged himself against everything else, he continued. The months of that winter moved very slowly. He sat in his cold hut for 16 hours a day and practiced what he had been taught to practice, and what he had taught himself to practice, and what he had invented in the absence of adequate teaching, and what he had given up practicing and then resumed. And none of it arrived at the place he needed it to arrive. The mind did exactly what the mind does when told to be still. It became louder. It generated thoughts about the quality of his practice, then thoughts about the thoughts about the quality of his practice, then thoughts about what kind of person sits in a cold hut for 16 hours a day, generating thoughts about thoughts, and whether such a person could be considered to be genuinely seeking, or whether he was simply performing, seeking for an audience of one. The cough worsened. He had by this point almost entirely stopped eating, not as a discipline, but because the body no longer seemed interested in continuing the arrangement. A neighbor who had been leaving rice at his door stopped finding the previous day's portion eaten. She waited for a sign of life and eventually opened the door to find him lying against the wall with his eyes open and his breathing, the particular shallow breathing that belongs to a body that is running its last negotiations with staying. She sent for a physician. The physician came, assessed the situation with the directness that physicians in the Edo period brought to terminal cases, and told Bankei what Bankei already knew, that his lungs had been compromised, that the winter had made this worse, and that the most likely outcome was death before spring. Bankei received this information with perfect calm, which the physician found unsettling. The physician left. The neighbor left rice. Bankei propped himself against the wall and continued. He did not precisely decide what happened next. It is truer to say that what happened next was permitted by the exhaustion of everything that had been preventing it. After 14 years of urgent teasers, relentless seeking of treating the question like a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be cleared, a door to be forced, the force simply ran out. Not in the dramatic way that forces run out in stories, with a crash and a recognition. More like a fire that has been burning down a long piece of wood, nothing sudden. Only the gradual arrival at the place where there is no more wood. He sat. He was not practicing. There was nothing left to practice with. He was not seeking. There was no energy remaining for seeking. He was not even, in any meaningful sense, thinking. The cough had made sustained thinking impossible for weeks, and the weakness had made thinking feel like a luxury too expensive for his current circumstances. He simply sat. At some point, in what he later understood to have been the middle of a winter afternoon light, coming thin and white through the gaps in the boards, the kind of light that gives no warmth, something rose in his throat. He leaned to the side. He spat at the wall. A mass of dark phlegm slid slowly down the plank. He watched it, and in the watching, in that single undefended moment of pure, unguarded attention, something that had been pressed very tightly against the inside of a door simply opened. Not an insight, not a vision, not a descent of light. Simply an opening. A recognition so direct and so obvious that he immediately understood why 14 years of effort had not produced it. Because effort had been the thing that kept it just out of reach. You cannot force open a door that opens toward you. He later described what he understood in that moment this way. All things are perfectly resolved in the unborn. The unborn. The awareness that was present before any thought arose to name it. The hearing that heard before the mind arrived to label what it heard. The knowing that had been present every moment of his 14-year search, not as something to be found, but as the very thing doing the finding. The one who had been asking the question all along. He recovered slowly, ate a rice, and walked again. In the spring, he found his way back to his old teacher, Umpo Zenjo, who confirmed what Bankei already knew. Umpo sent him on. Bankei spent years continuing to clarify and deepen what had opened in that hut. And then, in the manner of teachers who have understood something that seems obvious, once seen, and impossible to communicate otherwise, he began to teach. He did not teach the way Rinzai masters of his time typically taught, with koans delivered in formal interview, with shouts and blows, with the elaborate machinery of traditional Zen training. He went, instead, to the markets and the temple courtyards and the halls where farmers and merchants and women and samurai gathered, and he talked to them in ordinary Japanese, the language people used to discuss vegetables and weather and money, and he told them what he had found in a cold hut in Harima province in his 24th year. He told them about the unborn mind. He held large assemblies, sometimes thousands of people at a time, and he would tell his listeners to pay attention to a simple thing. He would say, "Right now, as I speak, you can hear my voice. But notice you are also hearing sounds from outside this hall. Birds, perhaps. Wind. Someone walking on the road." He would pause. You did not decide to hear those sounds. You did not put forth effort to receive them. You did not create a special state of mind in which such hearing becomes possible. Without any preparation, without any practice, without even thinking you heard. The hearing happened before any thought about hearing arose. This effortless, always present, hearing, this awareness that receives everything without being disturbed by anything. This is the unborn mind. You received it from your mother at birth. You have had it every moment of every day since. It is not something you need to achieve. It is the very thing doing all your searching. There is a particular exchange recorded from one of Bankei's assemblies that illustrates how directly he taught this. A monk stood up during a talk and said, with considerable frustration, "Master, I have been practicing Zen for 12 years and I still cannot stop the noise in my mind. Every time I sit in meditation, thoughts arise. How do I make the thoughts stop?" Bankei looked at him for a moment. With that expression he had, patient, warm, slightly amused, and said, "Who is asking this question?" The monk said, "I am." "And where is the I that is asking?" A pause. The monk looked uncertain. Bankei said, "Somewhere in your practice, you decided that the thoughts were the problem and you were the one who had to fix them. But notice, right now, as you ask your question, there is something that hears the question. Right now, as thoughts arise, there is something that notices the thoughts. Right now, as you feel frustrated with your practice, there is something that feels the frustration. Is that something the hearing, the noticing, the awareness? Is that making noise? Is that disturbed?" The monk was quiet. Bankei said, "You have been trying to empty the room of furniture, but you are not the furniture. You are the room." This single exchange, the room, not the furniture, moved through the assembly like a sound wave. Visibly, people shifted. Something that had been held in a particular configuration released itself. The monk sat down and did not ask another question that day. What Bankei was pointing to is something that remains across 4 centuries, exactly as present and exactly as available as it was in his assembly halls. Right now, your mind is producing something. Thoughts, perhaps, the residue of the day, plans, are fragments, echoes of conversations. The mind does this. It is what minds do. It has never stopped, and it may not stop tonight. And that is entirely fine. Because beneath all of that, not after it, not instead of it, but beneath it, like the ground beneath a house that was built on it before anyone thought to mention the ground, there is something that hears, not something you made, not something you achieved, not something you need to find because you have never for a single moment lost it. The thoughts arise, and this awareness hears them, without effort, without preparation, without being disturbed by their content, any more than the room is disturbed by what the furniture does inside it. The mind that Bankei called unborn is not a special state. It is not an achievement of long practice. It is this bare, effortless knowing that is receiving these words right now, that was receiving the sounds of your room before these words began, that will receive whatever arises in the hours of this night without requiring anything of you at all. It was there in the cold hut in Harima when a young monk coughed up everything he had been holding and found, in the space that followed, something that had been waiting with perfect patience for exactly that kind of emptying. It is here now. You don't have to do anything with it. You don't have to protect it, or cultivate it, or make sure you are properly accessing it. You only need to stop, for a moment, trying to become the room, and recognize that you already are. Feel the weight of your body, the natural rise and fall of your chest, the sounds of your room arriving without effort. heard without effort, passing without effort. The unborn mind is already receiving all of this, already open, already here, not something you reach, something you rest in. And as that understanding settles, softer than a thought, quieter than the thoughts that will continue to arise around it, we travel now across the sea to Korea, to a mountain monastery where a woman practitioner sits with a single question that has no right answer and discovers, in the refusing of all wrong answers, something she will spend the rest of her life being grateful she couldn't avoid. The question, what is hearing? The pine forests on the slopes of Joggisan Mountain held their snow differently from the forests further north. Further north, in the provinces closer to the capital where Seon Sonim had grown up, snow came in, thick, wet sheets that bent the pine boughs downward until they dragged on the ground, and the whole forest moved under that weight with a slow, groaning patience. Here, in the mountains of South Jeolla province, where Songgwangsa Monastery stood, the snow was drier and lighter. It coated each needle individually, outlining every branch in white, so that the forest became a kind of detailed drawing of itself, each tree precise and intricate against the grey winter sky. Seon Sonim had been watching this forest for 6 years. She had come to the mountain at the age of 22, in the latter years of the Goryeo dynasty, when the court's relationship with Buddhism was still warm enough to permit the ordination of women without the complications that would grow worse under the dynasty that followed. Her family in Jeonju minor aristocracy, careful with its resources, proud of its library, had not understood her decision and had communicated their lack of understanding with the thoroughness that families in that era brought to disapproval. Her father had said that a woman of her position did not become a nun. Her mother had said nothing, which was worse. Her younger brother, who studied Confucian texts with the concentrated ambition of someone who intended to pass his examinations on the first attempt, had looked at her with an expression somewhere between admiration and the certainty that she had made a serious error. She had bowed to all of them, gathered her few things, and walked north toward the mountain. The name she had taken with her ordination, Seon, meaning Seon practice itself. The word worn as a reminder and a vow was the choice of the abbess who received her. A small woman of 60-some years who had been practicing on this mountain since before Seon Sonim was born, and who had the particular quality of unhurried attention that comes to people who have stopped being surprised by anything their minds produce. The abbess had looked at her for a long time when she arrived, assessed something, and then given her the name. "Wear it honestly," she had said. "It will be a question as often as a comfort." The practice Seon Sonim had been given was the practice of Hwadu. Specifically, she had been given the question, "I gui muyot go," what is this that hears? It was a variation of the question that Master Haisim, the great successor of state preceptor Jinul, had reportedly encouraged women practitioners to carry, the understanding being that the Hwadu was not a puzzle to be solved, but a knot to be pulled tighter. A place of concentration so complete that the ordinary machinery of the thinking mind, encountering something it genuinely could not process, would eventually cease its usual operations and fall still. This was the teaching as Seon Sonim understood it. She had understood it intellectually from the beginning, with the speed and confidence that people trained in Confucian texts bring to new material. She was good at understanding. She could explain the Hwadu beautifully when the abbess asked. She could trace its logic, describe what the practice was designed to accomplish. articulate the distinction between intellectual understanding and direct realization with clarity and precision. This, as it turned out, was the problem. What is this that hears? She sat with this question in the pre-dawn meditation hall, where the stone floor held the cold from the night in a way that rose through the cushion and settled in her knees by the second hour. She sat with it during the work period, sweeping the paths, drawing water from the well, carrying firewood with the other nuns in a line up the steep path from the storage house. She sat with it during meals, during sutra, chanting, during the brief period each evening when the bell rang and the day was formally ended and the mountain became quietly its own again. And every time she brought the question, "What is this that hears?" the mind answered. Not dramatically, not loudly, with the quiet efficiency of a mechanism that has been doing its job for 22 years without a single day off. Before she could even complete the question in the space of attention, the mind had already produced a response. Awareness, consciousness, the Buddha nature, the mind ground, the unborn. Every answer she had learned in study, every passage she had memorized from the teaching records of masters she had read in the monastery library, arrived before she could prevent them, organized itself into a tidy response, and settled like a bird on a branch comfortably, without any sense that something had gone wrong. She knew these answers were wrong. Not wrong in their content, they were accurate descriptions of what the Huadu was pointing toward. They were wrong in the way that a finger pointing at the moon is wrong when you grab the finger and call it the moon. She knew this also. She could explain the distinction precisely, and the mind kept answering anyway. In her third year of practice, she went to the abbess. She sat across from the old woman in the small interview room that smelled of pine resin and old ink, and she said what she had been sitting with. "When I bring the Huadu, the mind answers immediately. Always the same kind of answer. Always accurate. Always from the texts. Always beside the point. I cannot stop it. I have tried holding the question more tightly. I have tried holding it more loosely. I have tried sitting with the question for very long periods. I have tried asking it rapidly, repeatedly, without pause. The mind answers every time." The abbess was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do the answers feel like?" Seon Sonim thought about this. She said, "Satisfied, complete, as though something has been resolved. And the question? Gone, until I bring it back." The abbess nodded slowly. Then she said something that Seon Sonim would carry for the remaining 30 years of her practice life. "You are not investigating the question. You are managing it." Seon Sonim was quiet. When a question is genuinely not answered, the abbess said, it does not produce satisfaction. It produces what? What happens in the body when something is genuinely unresolved? Seon Sonim considered. A kind of pressure, a tension, something that cannot settle. Yes, that tension is not your enemy. It is the practice. It means the question has not yet been answered from somewhere deeper than the text library of the mind. The text library is very fast. It has been answering questions since before you could read. It answers in your sleep. You will never outrun it by asking faster. And you will never dissolve it by being more clever than it is. Then what do I do? The abbess looked at her for a long moment. Stop letting the question be a question you are asking. Let it be a place you live. Seon Sonim returned to practice. She did not immediately understand what the abbess had meant. This was itself unusual. She understood most things immediately, and the lag between instruction and comprehension was something she had not experienced often enough to have learned how to rest in it. She had the subtle, specific discomfort of a person who is good at learning, confronting the one thing that cannot be learned in the way they know how to learn. For 3 more years, she sat with the Huadu and let the answers come when they came, and tried to do as the abbess had suggested, to treat the question not as a problem awaiting solution, but as a country she was inhabiting. The question as weather, as terrain, as the color of the light in a particular season. Not something she was asking, but something she was breathing. The shift came in the winter of her 6th year, during a night meditation when the snow had been falling for hours, and the silence it created was the particular dense, absorbed silence of snow that falls steadily through windless air, not quiet so much as full, the world fully occupied by the sound of falling. She had been sitting for 3 hours. The question, "What is this that hears?" was present the way the cold in the stone floor was present, not thought about, not managed, simply there, as continuous as her own breathing. And somewhere, in the 3rd hour, the mind's library that fast, reliable, thoroughly catalogued mind's library that had been providing answers for 22 years ran out. Not catastrophically, not with any drama. The way a fire runs out when the last piece of wood has been consumed, a gradual diminishment, a reducing of heat, and then an absence. The answers did not stop because she prevented them. They stopped because they had been asked, and finally, on this snowy night, the cupboard was empty. There was nothing left to say. The question hung in the silence. What is this that hears? And in the pause between the question and the place where the answer had always been, something happened that had no language in the text library, because the text library had gone quiet. Something looked, without a looker. Something heard, without a listener. Something that was itself the very act of attending, with no one doing the attending. No Seon Sonim, no nun from Jeonju, no woman who had walked north from her family's disapproval, just a bare, open, luminous noticing that had no inside or outside, no subject or object, no one who knew, and something to be known. It lasted perhaps 10 breaths. Then the mind reassembled. The cold in the floor returned. The snow silence resumed its quality as weather rather than revelation. Seon Sonim was again a woman sitting on a cushion in a monastery on a mountain. But something had shifted in a way that did not unshift. She went to the abbess the next morning. She did not try to describe what had happened. This was itself unusual. The part of her that had spent 6 years producing accurate descriptions was uncharacteristically quiet. She simply sat. The abbess looked at her for a long time. "Continue," she said at last. And Seon Sonim did. For 30 more years in those mountain halls, through the long suppression of Buddhism that came under the new dynasty, through the years when monks and nuns were literally banned from the cities and the mountain became not a chosen retreat but the only place left. She continued. The Wadu continued. The question never entirely lost its edge. But the relationship with the question had changed completely. She was no longer a person asking something she hoped to answer. She was a question that knew itself to be a question alive, open, unresolvable, and in that irresolvability, strangely and permanently free. There is a pattern the mind runs that you may recognize from your own experience. Something arrives, a sensation, a sound, a feeling, a worry, and before you have fully received it, the mind has already moved to respond. To name it, judge it, categorize it, to solve it, file it, or dismiss it. The interval between arrival and response has grown so short, through long practice, that it can seem like there is no interval at all, that things arrive already processed, already understood, already answered. This speed is genuinely useful. It is how you navigate. It is how you make sense of a world that would otherwise be overwhelming in its raw, unmediated fullness. But it is also how some things never quite reach you. The feelings that get named before they are felt. The sounds that get categorized before they are heard. The person in front of you whose words arrive already filtered through everything you already believe about them, so that what reaches you is not what they said, but your prediction of what they would say. The Huadu practice that Seon Sonim carried for 36 years on that mountain was, at its core, the practice of creating a pause, a deliberate, sustained pause between the arriving of something and the mind's response to it. A space in which things could be received rather than processed. A gap brief, cultivated, eventually habitual, in which direct hearing became possible. You cannot force this pause. Trying to force it is itself the mind doing what the mind does, managing, controlling, producing the appearance of stillness. But you can allow it. Right now, with your body resting and your breath moving of its own accord, there is something arriving. The sound of this voice, the small sounds of your room in the dark, the sensation of warmth where blanket meets skin, the quiet rhythm of your own breathing, which you have barely thought about all evening because it simply continues, dependable as the mountain, without needing your involvement. All of this is arriving. And for just this moment, you don't have to do anything with it. Not name it. Not store it. Not understand it. Not answer the question of what it is. Let it arrive. Feel the softness of the surface beneath you. The weight of your own arms. The way the breath comes in slightly cool and leaves slightly warm, that small, constant exchange between you and the air of your room. The question does not need an answer right now. What hears can simply hear. And as that space opens quieter than thought, deeper than understanding, we cross the sea once more and travel to the lowlands of Vietnam, to a village where a young monk discovers that the sound of a bell is not a sound at all, but a doorway. And that doorway, it turns out, has been standing open his entire life. The garden of Tu Hiu Temple in Hue smelled of lotus and pine resin and the particular sweetness that rises from still water on a warm morning when the sun has not yet grown heavy enough to burn. Min had arrived at the temple 6 months ago, a novice monk of 19 who had grown up on the other side of the Hung River in a household that ran on urgency. His father was a tradesman who moved between Hue and Da Nang selling cloth, always calculating the next trip, the next margin, the next decision pressing against the heels of the last one. His mother managed the family accounts with the quiet precision of someone who has learned that worry directed outward as work is at least partially productive. His 2 older brothers were already apprenticed to their father's trade. There had been no obvious reason for Min to go to a temple except that he had wanted to, with a directness of wanting that had surprised everyone in the household, including himself, and which he had followed with the slightly dazed decisiveness of someone who is not entirely sure what they are doing but understands that not doing it would be worse. The abbot of Tuhio had received him with the warmth of a man who had accepted many young men who were not entirely sure what they were doing and had learned to recognize the genuine ones by the quality of their uncertainty. He had been given a grey novice robe, a sleeping mat in the dormitory room he shared with 3 other young monks, and a daily schedule so complete in its organization that the first time he read it, he experienced a brief, animal panic at the thought of every hour accounted for from before dawn to after dark. Then he had experienced a quieter recognition that this was what he had come for. Not freedom from structure, but freedom through it. A container that might hold, for the first time, the contents of his attention. But 6 months in, the attention was not cooperating. The thing Min had not anticipated was the noise. Not the noise of the temple, which was in fact remarkably quiet. The loudest sounds being the bell that called the community to practice, the chanting in the morning hall, the soft percussion of sandals on stone paths, to the wind through the pine trees that stood at the garden's eastern edge. The noise was entirely internal. It was the noise he had carried from his father's house without realizing he was carrying it. The way you carry the smell of a place in your clothes without noticing until you are somewhere else and someone mentions it. The racing was the most familiar feature of his mind. A quality so habitual he had assumed it was simply what thought felt like. Thoughts arrived in clusters, not in sequence. While he was considering one thing, 3 others arrived alongside it. And while he was trying to address those, 5 more appeared. And the whole edifice built itself while he watched with a helpless combination of familiarity and exhaustion. He had assumed that this would stop when he became a monk, that the stillness of the temple would transfer itself, as though by osmosis, into the stillness of the mind, that the garden, the lotus pond, the pine trees, the meditative silences of the older monks who had been practicing for decades, that all of this would simply, by proximity, resolve the chaos he had brought with him. It had not. If anything, the silence of the temple made the internal noise more audible. In a bustling household, it had been masked by external activity. Here, without distraction, it ran continuously. Plans for the next practice period, worries about whether he was meditating correctly, remembered conversations from his family home that he should not have been thinking about at all, a recurring concern about whether the abbot thought well of him, observations about his own observations that continued in spirals of increasing uselessness. During the morning sitting meditation, while the other monks sat with what appeared to be perfect tranquility, Min sat with what felt like a room full of people all speaking at once. He had confessed this to Brother Tuan, the older monk who served as his mentor. In his 2nd month, Brother Tuan had listened with the patient attention that seemed to be the default expression of everyone in this place, and then said, "The mind is doing what it has always done. The difference is that now you can hear it." This had not been as comforting as Brother Tuan probably intended. The practice Min was learning, alongside sitting meditation and sutra study and the gentle art of walking without hurrying, was the practice of the bell. In the tradition of Tu Hiu, and in the teaching lineage that had been carried from this temple outward into the world by teachers whose names the novices learned in the first weeks of study, the bell was not only a signal, it was a practice unto itself. When the bell rang, the large bronze bell in the tower that called the community to formal sessions, but also the smaller wooden bell in the meditation hall, and also any sound that could be received with the quality of a bell. A clock chiming, a bird call, even the sound of a telephone in the world outside the practice was to stop. Not to make a decision to stop. Not to finish the sentence you were composing in your head and then stop. simply to stop, mid-thought, mid-movement, mid-worry, and let 3 full breaths arrive before resuming whatever you were doing. The teaching behind this practice was something Min had heard many times in the first months of his training. Recited so often, it had acquired the smooth, familiar texture of a stone carried in a pocket. The bell is the voice of the Buddha calling you home. Every time you hear it, you come back to yourself, back to the present moment, back to your true home. He had understood this teaching immediately and thoroughly. He could explain it to another novice with clarity and warmth. He had memorized the relevant passages from the teacher's talks with his usual facility. And every time the bell rang, his mind produced a fleeting thought about how the bell was supposed to work, followed immediately by a return to whatever it had been doing before. The morning of the change was a morning in late spring, when the frangipani trees along the path to the meditation hall were in full flower and their smell heavy. Sweet, slightly narcotic, moved through the whole garden on the warm air coming up from the river. Min was sweeping the stone path between the main hall and the smaller shrine building, which was a task that required minimal mental attention and therefore tended to fill itself with his mind's usual overflow. He was sweeping and simultaneously reviewing a conversation he had never had with his older brother about their father's business, and also composing a question for the abbot that he might or might not ever actually ask, and also monitoring whether he was maintaining proper attention on his sweeping. When the bell rang, the single, clean note of the meditation hall bell, struck by the monk on morning duty, the sound that in the Vietnamese temple tradition is sometimes described as containing all of the teaching at once, everything that needs to be said arriving in one complete resonance. Min stopped the broom. He took 3 breaths. This he had done hundreds of times. He was aware of it as a practice. He was monitoring his breath, which is to say he was thinking about the breath while experiencing it. First breath, this is the first breath. Second breath, this is the second, third breath, all right? That was 3, and then, for a reason he could not have named and would not have been able to recreate deliberately, something was different in the 4th breath. Not a breath he was counting, or watching, or performing. A breath that simply arrived. The warm, frangipani-scented air of the late spring morning entering his body with the complete, unconditional simplicity of air entering a body that had temporarily stopped arguing with the world. The sound of the bell was still present, not as a memory but as a continuing resonance. The way a struck bell continues to vibrate long after the impact. The sound decreasing in volume, but not in quality. Thinning towards silence without ever quite becoming silence. Always still itself. Min heard it. Not the idea of the bell. Not the teaching about the bell. Not the monitoring of his response to the bell. He heard it the way the air heard it completely, without a gap between the sound and the receiving of the sound. Without an observer positioned at a slight remove, evaluating the quality of his reception. The frangipani's perfume was also there. The warmth of the stone path beneath his sandals, the distant sound of Brother Tuan's broom on the path around the corner, the soft, rhythmic sound of a person sweeping without thinking about sweeping. Everything was present, including Min, including the broom still in his hands, including the question he had been composing for the abbot and the conversation he had been having with his absent brother. All of it present, none of it demanding anything. The whole garden simply existing in the moment after the bell, before the world resumed its usual velocity. He did not know how long it lasted. When Brother Tuan appeared around the corner and saw him standing in the path holding his broom with an expression the older monk had not seen on his face before, Min had been standing for either 30 seconds or 10 minutes. He genuinely did not know. "Are you all right?" Brother Tuen asked. "Yes," said Min. And then, after a pause, the bell. Brother Tuen nodded, with the nod of someone who understands exactly what is meant and does not need it, explained further. "Come for tea," he said. "When you are ready." Min continued as a monk for the next 40 years. Through the difficult decades, when the country changed entirely around the temples, when some monastics found the practice impossible to maintain amid the upheaval, and others found it was the only thing that made the upheaval navigable, he served eventually as a teacher himself, receiving young novices the way he had once been received, including ones who arrived with racing minds and the quiet desperation of people who have recognized the noise but do not know what to do with it. To all of them, at some point, he told this story, not as instruction, more as a kind of weather report. This is what that country looks like when you have been there. And he always included the detail that had remained most vivid across 4 decades, not the opening, not the insight itself, but the specific quality of the frangipani-scented air in that 4th breath. The way the sweetness arrived without any effort on his part. The way the warmth of the stone path made itself known through the soles of his sandals, simply because he was, for once, not thinking about the soles of his sandals. The way the sound of Brother Tuen's distant sweeping became briefly, completely beautiful. "The bell does not give you peace," he would say. Peace was always there. The bell simply interrupts the conversation that was preventing you from noticing. You have been listening for a while now, and the body has found its settling. Perhaps the mind is still producing its weather thoughts, arriving, moving through, departing. Perhaps it has quieted somewhat. Either way is fine. Neither requires anything of you. The bell that Min heard in the garden of Tu Hio has been ringing, in one form or another, in every tradition, across this whole long night of stories. Ananda's reign, Dongshan's stream, Bankei's moment of opening, Seon Sonim's emptied cupboard, all of them pointing toward the same simple, available thing. The moment when the layer of commentary between you and your actual experience grows thin enough that something direct can come through. It does not require a garden. It does not require frangipani. It does not require a monastery bell, though such bells are useful because they are beautiful and because their function is precisely this, to interrupt the forward momentum of thought and create a small, deliberate pause. You carry your own bell with you always. It is the breath. It is the sound in the room, which was here before you noticed it and will continue after you have fallen asleep. It is the weight of your body right now against the surface beneath you, which has been faithfully supporting you through this entire night and has asked nothing in return except to be occasionally noticed. Feel it now. The support beneath you. The particular warmth where skin meets fabric. The soft in-breath arriving. The soft out-breath leaving. One complete exchange. One small, perfect circle of giving and receiving, happening right now without your involvement. Evidence that something in you already knows how to let things arrive and depart without interference. The sound of this voice is like the bell. You don't have to hold it. You don't have to remember it. Let it do what the bell does: arrive, resonate, and release while your body rests more deeply with every passing breath. Let the eyes rest behind their closed lids. Let the jaw soften. Let the hands, wherever they are, simply lie where they are lying. You don't have to arrive anywhere. You are already home. And as Min's bell continues its long resonance across the warm Vietnamese evening and into this night, wherever you are, we travel now to the Tibetan plateau, where a hermit sitting in a cave above the tree line is learning something about silence that cannot be learned in any hall or garden. It must be learned the way all truly difficult things are learned, in the long, undecorated company of wind. The cave above the tree line in the calm region of eastern Tibet was not, on its own merits, a comfortable place to spend 3 years. It faced northeast, which meant that in winter the wind came directly at its mouth without obstruction from the ridge. The floor was uneven stone, its natural depressions worn smooth by water that had seeped through during the summer rains over a span of time that made a human life seem parenthetical. It was perhaps 4 body lengths deep and 2 body lengths wide, with a ceiling that sloped down at the back to something less than standing height, so that a tall person, which Sonam was, by calm standards spent most of his time either seated or folded into the particular economy of posture that long retreat practitioners develop. The entrance faced out over a valley that was beautiful in the way that very high, very empty places are beautiful, not warmly, not welcomingly, but with a kind of impartial vastness that stopped being threatening after the first 6 months and became, in time, something closer to companionable. He had been here since late summer, when the wildflowers on the valley slopes were at their last, the most concentrated peak of color before the cold descended. It was now the deep of winter. The valley below was white. The trees in the lower reaches of the mountain had disappeared into uniformity. The sky, when it was not producing snow, he was a blue, so absolute, it seemed less like a color than like a material, something you could reach out and touch, something with edges. Sonam was 31 years old, a monk of the Nyingma school who had been practicing under a teacher in the large monastery in the valley for 9 years before the teacher had sent him here with a set of instructions for practice. Enough butter tea to last 3 weeks, and the laconic observation that everything he needed to understand he already carried and would find in the cave if he was willing to stop looking for it. The teacher's name was Jigme, a common name in the Kham region, shared by half the monks Sonam had known since childhood. This particular Jigme had the quality that distinguished teachers in this tradition: not brilliance, not charisma, not even obvious kindness, though he was kind, but a quality of settled presence so complete that sitting near him for 10 minutes produced. He was not old, perhaps 50, and he did not give long teachings. He gave short ones, repeated with variation until they began to mean something other than what they appeared to mean on first hearing. The teaching he had returned to most often, across 9 years, was this: Rigpa is not something you create. It is not something you receive. It is what remains when you stop adding to awareness the layer of the one who is aware. Sonam could have repeated this teaching in his sleep. He had been sitting with it for 9 years, examining it from every angle, the way a person examines a stone they have been carrying in their pocket, finding new facets, new surfaces, new moments of light. He understood it the way he understood his own heartbeat continuously, unremarkably, without revelation. This, as Jigme had observed with gentle precision on the last morning before Sonam left for the cave, was the remaining problem. You understand it the way you understand everything, the teacher had said. Through understanding. The understanding itself is the last thing between you and the thing you are trying to understand. The first months in the cave had been, in their way, educational. Sonam had practiced with the diligence of someone who has been well trained and genuinely motivated, which is to say, with tremendous effort, applied toward the goal of effortlessness. He sat for long hours in the formal practice posture, his back straight, his hands in the mudra of equanimity, his awareness directed inward toward the instruction, rest in the natural state, the primordial purity, the luminous expanse that is the basis of all experience. And awareness, when directed inward with effort, did the only thing it can do when treated as an object of directed attention. It contracted. It became a searchlight rather than a window. It produced the particular quality of subtle strain that meditators recognize as the sign that they are trying too hard, which is itself the problem they are trying to solve. Jigme had warned him about this. Most teachers in this tradition warned about this. The texts Sonam had studied described this. He knew, with extraordinary thoroughness, the precise nature of the obstacle he was encountering. He encountered it anyway. By the third month, he had mostly stopped sitting in formal posture for long hours. Not because he had given up. The idea of giving up had never occurred to him with any seriousness, but because the cave, which offered very little in the way of distraction, had slowly begun to teach him something that the monastery hall could not. It taught him about the wind. The wind in calm at that elevation was not a simple phenomenon. It came in from multiple directions depending on the hour, the season, the conditions on the passes to the north. It spoke in a range of registers that Sonam, having nothing else to listen to, gradually came to distinguish. There was the high, thin whistle that arrived when the wind moved fast over the cave's lip and found the natural channel that the rock had worn there over centuries. There was the lower, more irregular sound that came when the wind moved more slowly, filling the cave's entrance with a kind of breathing quality, in and out, as though the mountain itself were resting. There was the distant roar from further up the ridge when the wind was strong enough to move through the trees several hundred meters above and send the sound down as a sustained bass note in which individual trees could not be distinguished from the whole. In the first months, Sonam had heard all of this as background. The way you hear traffic from a room above a street present, identified, filed under the category of ambient sound that requires no further attention, but with nothing else to attend to, and with the particular quality of sustained stillness that 3 months in a cave produces in a person who has not been distracted from it. The hearing began to change. It changed the way vision changes when you stop looking for something specific and simply allow the visual field to become present in its totality. The wind sounds, which had been background, gradually became not foreground exactly, but present in a more complete sense. Sonam found himself receiving them with an attention that was not directed, not effortful, not the searchlight pointing at an object. More like water receiving rain. One evening in the 4th month, he was sitting at the cave's entrance, watching the last light leave the valley, the particular sequence in which high-altitude evenings fade, the orange going first from the highest peaks, leaving only the blue, which deepened through several shades until the peaks were simply dark shapes against a sky that still remembered the sun. The wind was low that evening, a barely present movement that touched the skin without lifting anything, that made no sound that could be named but could be felt as a continuous, gentle contact. Sonam was not meditating. He was simply sitting, because there was nowhere else to be and no reason to be different than he was. His teacher's words were present the way old. Familiar words often are not as active thought, but as a quality of the attention, an orientation, a learned inclination toward a particular kind of looking. The awareness that was receiving the last light on the peaks, the cooling air, the low sound of the wind. This awareness was not doing anything. It was not producing commentary. It was not building its observations into a structure of understanding. It was simply receiving, with the complete neutrality of a mirror, everything that arrived. And for a duration that Sonam could not have measured, the valley was fully dark before he noticed time again the layer he had always thought of as himself. The one who was aware, the one who was doing the receiving, the one in whom all of this experience was occurring. That layer was simply not there. Not absent in the way a person is absent when they leave a room. Absent the way a category is absent when you realize it was never a separate thing. The awareness had not gone anywhere. The valley was still present. The cooling air still touched his skin. The stars, which had appeared while he was not watching for them, were present above the ridge with the same absolute stillness they always had. But there was no Sonam watching all of this. There was only the watching. He went down the mountain at the end of the 3 years and found his teacher in the monastery courtyard, supervising the repair of a section of wall with the unhurried attention he brought to everything. Jigme looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "You found the wind." Sonam was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I found what the wind was pointing at." "Yes," said the teacher. "Those are the same thing." He returned to watching the wall repair. After a few minutes he said, "Without turning, Rigpa is not the absence of wind. It is what hears the wind before the one who hears arrives." Sonam stood in the courtyard and felt the truth of this settle, not into understanding, but into the body, the way warmth settles into stone that has been in the sun. It was not a revelation. It was a recognition, as though the sentence had already been said and he was only now arriving at the place where it had been said. "How do I keep it?" he asked. Jigme turned and looked at him with an expression that contained both warmth and what Sonam had learned. Across 9 years and 3 years of cave. To recognize as the specific precision of a teaching that had no room for softening. "You do not keep it," the teacher said. "You recognize it. Again and again. Each time, it is complete. Each time, it is already there. There is nothing to keep because it has never gone anywhere. What the Dzogchen teachings call Rigpa cannot be adequately described in language, because language is a product of the very process it is pointing beyond. The teachers who have tried across 12 centuries have produced a remarkable variety of descriptions. All of them approximate, all of them useful. Pristine awareness, the natural state, luminous knowing, the ground that was never contaminated by what arises within it. But all of these descriptions share a common pointing direction. They are not pointing at a special experience you have not yet had. They are pointing at the awareness that is already present, the one that is receiving these words right now, that noticed when your body shifted slightly a few minutes ago, that is aware of the silence between these sounds. This awareness is not something you manufacture through effort. It is not something that becomes available only after years of meditation. Though years of meditation may help you trust what you find when you look, it is the most ordinary thing there is. So ordinary that it is easy to overlook in the search for something more extraordinary. It was here before the first word of this night's journey was spoken. It will be here after the last word falls into silence. It is the clear, untroubled space in which tonight's stories have been appearing and dissolving, each one a wave that forms, moves, and returns to the ocean it was always made of. Right now, let the attention rest without going anywhere. Not turned inward, not turned outward, not seeking, not avoiding. Just the bare fact of being awake in a body that breathes, in a room that holds you, in a night that is moving now toward its deepest hours. The wind that Sonam heard on the calm plateau is also the breath moving through your body in this moment, not as a metaphor, but as the same reality, the same movement of the world through a temporary, beloved, particular form. Let it move. Let the breath arrive and depart without interference. Let the sounds of your room be what they are. Let the awareness receive them the way the valley received the last light completely, without effort, without needing them to be other than they are. You don't have to find Rigpa. It is what is finding you. And as that understanding settles into the body like warmth into stone, feel the softness now in your shoulders, the heaviness now in your hands. We return eastward across Asia one more time, to the mountains of Korea, where an aging teacher waits by a window in the last year of his life to offer a student the teaching he has been withholding until the student was ready to hear it. Not because the teaching was difficult, but because some things can only be heard in silence. And silence, it turns out, takes the longest time to learn. There is a village in the Isan region of northeast Thailand where the roads are red laterite dust in the dry season and red laterite mud in the wet season, and where the difference between one and the other is mostly a matter of whether you need to wash your feet after walking. In the early decades of the 20th century, when the boy who would become Ajahn Chah grew up near the town of Ubon Ratchathani, this region was still very much at the edge of the known world. As far as Bangkok was concerned, remote, poor by the standards of the central populated by subsistence farmers whose lives turned on the monsoon rains in ways that made the body understand impermanence before the mind had any words for it. A bad rain year meant real hunger. A good one meant the particular relief and gratitude that only comes to people who know the alternative. Chah's family were farmers. His father was a practical man who had learned to read, which was unusual enough in that village to give him a kind of informal authority. His mother cooked rice 3 times a day and grew vegetables in the strip of garden behind the house, and knew, with the quiet certainty of women who have raised many children, which of her sons would stay and which would go. She did not say which category young Chah fell into. She watched him. At 9, he entered the monastery as a novice, as village boys customarily did. He stayed 3 years, learned to read and write in Pali and Thai, absorbed the rhythms of monastic life, the early rising, the alms round through the village at dawn, the long afternoon hours of study and sitting, and then returned home to help on the farm. Something had been planted during those 3 years. It grew slowly, the way things grow in that climate, not gently, but insistently, pushing through whatever was above it with the patient determination of a plant that has no option but the direction of the light. When he was 20, he returned to the monastery. For good, though he did not use those words. He simply went back and did not come home again. For the first years, the practice moved in the way that practice moves when the student is diligent and the instruction is mostly from books, forward but not through. Chah was disciplined, earnest, genuinely motivated by something he could feel but not yet name, a quality of intention that his teachers recognized as unusual and that the other monks occasionally resented and occasionally admired and occasionally did not notice at all, because the Isan countryside was full of young men in robes who were genuinely trying to understand suffering. In his 5th year, his father died. This is the kind of event that either sharpens a practice or ends it. For Chah, it sharpened. He sat beside his father's body in the temple hall and felt the full weight of impermanence pressing through every philosophical understanding he had accumulated, testing each one the way you test a rope by pulling it, discovering which ones held and which came apart in your hands. Most of the philosophical understanding came apart. What remained was the question, not an intellectual question, but a felt one. What actually survives? What, in the midst of this, is not destroyed? He left the monastery and walked. For 7 years he walked through the forests of northeast Thailand and further, through the cremation grounds where the bodies of the village dead were burned on wooden pyres in open clearings, through the tiger-inhabited jungle where the fear of the body was not a concept but a physical fact that arrived at 3 in the morning with a sound in the trees and did not leave until dawn. He slept under trees. He practiced with the sustained urgency of someone who has understood that the question is real and the time is genuinely limited. He sought teachers. He found some who were useful and some who were not. And then, in a monastery in the northeastern province, someone told him about a man named Ajahn Mun. The meeting with Ajahn Mun lasted only a short time. Chah arrived with the accumulated complexity of years of walking and seeking and studying the whole elaborate edifice of his questions, built with care over a decade of practice. Ajahn Mun looked at him and said something that was both simpler than the questions and more precise than any answer Chah had found in the texts. At the heart of all the teachings, everything is simple. Establish mindfulness. See that everything arises in the mind. Right there is the path. Chah carried this like a match carried into a dark room, small, bright, sufficient. He walked back into the forest and continued. In 1954, he settled in a tract of forest near his home village that was known to the local people as a haunted place. Ill-favored, avoided after dark. It had the kinds of rumors attached to it that such places collect in rural Thailand: spirits, bad luck, something in the trees that watched. The forest was also infested with malaria and had poor soil and was, in every practical respect, an unlikely place to build a monastery. Chah chose it because of its difficulty. The first monks who came to practice with him lived in conditions that reminded them regularly that the body was impermanent. Comfort was conditional, and the choice to remain was made fresh each morning. These were, he believed, useful reminders. Wat Bapong grew, slowly, then with gathering speed, as word moved through the northeast and then beyond it, that something was happening in this fever-ridden forest, that there was a teacher there who spoke in plain language about things most teachers obscured with complexity. He attracted Western monks, which surprised him and then ceased to surprise him, because the question, what actually survives, what is not destroyed, was apparently not a question that respected nationality. And across 30 years of teaching, through long days of formal instruction and informal conversations, through interviews conducted across a small table in a room that smelled of incense and rain, through stories told to farmers and stories told to scholars and stories told to children and stories told to dying monks who needed something that could hold in the last hours across all of it, Chah returned, in one form or another, to the same essential pointing. He called it the one who knows. The teaching emerged most clearly one afternoon when a young monk had come to him in visible distress. The monk had been practicing for 2 years and felt he was failing. His mind, he said, he was chaotic, full of thoughts he did not want. full of plans and worries and images from his life before robes that arrived unbidden during the morning meditation and refused to leave. He had tried noting them, returning to the breath, holding his attention on a single point with increasing desperation. The more he tried, the louder they became. Chah listened with the particular quality of attention he had, warm but unfrightened by what he heard, with no urgency to resolve it quickly, with the patient stillness of a man who had spent many years in forests, learning not to run from what was there. Then he said, "Who is aware of all these thoughts?" The monk was quiet. "When a thought comes," Chah continued, "there is something that knows the thought has come. When the mind is restless, there is something that knows the mind is restless. When you are worried, there is something that knows you are worried. Tell me, is the one who knows worried?" The monk sat with this. "When clouds cross the sky," Chah said, "the sky does not become a cloud. When smoke rises from a fire, the air does not become smoke. The thoughts are the clouds. The restlessness is the smoke. You have been spending your practice trying to remove the clouds, trying to clear the smoke, but you are not the clouds. You have always been the sky." The monk asked, "Then what do I do?" Chah was quiet for a moment. Then he said, in the manner of a man who has arrived at something through decades of walking and can now say it in a sentence, "Stop trying to be different from what you are. Simply know what you are. Know the knowing. Rest there." In the early 1980s, Ajahn Chah's health failed. Diabetes had been advancing for years, and with it came dizziness, memory gaps, a gradual withdrawal of the body from its accustomed functions. In 1981, he lost the ability to speak. The students who came to sit with him found not silence as a withholding, but silence as a teaching the teacher's body doing. At last, what his words had always been pointing toward, releasing its ownership of form, demonstrating impermanence, not as a concept, but as a lived fact occurring in real time. He continued to teach this way for 10 years. By all accounts, his face, during those final years, carried the expression his monks recognized from his best teachings, not serene in the way a statue is serene, but present in the way a large body of water is present. Deep, still, without obvious edges, receiving whatever arrived without being altered by it. He died in January 1992. Several thousand people came to the cremation. The forest at Wat Pa Pong was full for 3 days. The teaching of the one who knows is not a teaching about something distant or difficult to access. It is a teaching about what is present right now. In this moment, in this room, in this body resting in the dark. There are thoughts, perhaps many, perhaps a few, perhaps a nearly continuous murmur, or perhaps an unusual quiet has come with the late hours. Whichever is true, there is something that knows which is true, something that is aware of the thoughts if they are present, aware of the quiet if it is present, aware of the sounds of the room, the weight of the body, the movement of the breath. This knowing has no weight of its own. It is not angry. It is not worried. It does not become whatever it receives. A sound arrives, the knowing receives it and is not changed. A thought arises, the knowing notes it and is not disturbed. The breath moves, the knowing follows it with quiet, uncomplicated attention. The Thai forest teachers call this citta, in its purified aspect, the clear heart mind, the awareness that underlies all the mind's weather without being the weather itself. You do not need to manufacture this awareness. It is already doing its work. It has been doing its work since the first word of this night was spoken. It will continue after the last word falls into silence. Right now, feel the breath. The simple, reliable breath, moving on its own, not requiring your direction or your effort. And notice, something is aware of the breath. Something is receiving this. Something is here, present, open, already awake. This is the sky. The thoughts are the clouds. The clouds are not wrong. The sky does not argue with them. It simply remains what it always has been: vast, clear, present, undisturbed, while the clouds move through it and eventually, without fail, dissolve back into the spaciousness from which they came. Let your body rest now in that spaciousness. Let the jaw soften. Let the shoulders find their natural weight. Let the hands simply lie where they are, not needing to hold anything, not needing to be anywhere other than exactly where they are. You are the one who knows. You have always been the one who knows. And as Ajahn Chah's forest fills again with the sounds of a Thai evening, the frogs, the insects, the last birds settling into the darkening trees, we make our final journey tonight, to a place that has no tradition, no master, no story, no path, just a person in the dark, just the breath, just the sound of the world being what it is, and in that, everything. The snow at Bankei fell differently than it fell anywhere else Rioan had lived. This was not a mystical observation. It was a practical one, arrived at after 2 winters at the mountain monastery that Dogen Zenji had established in the forests of Ekizan province, a place so remote from the capital that reaching it required 3 days of walking after the main road ended, along paths that became, in winter, largely theoretical. The snow here fell in large, deliberate flakes with the unhurried purpose of snow that has no reason to be anywhere quickly. It accumulated on the temple roofs in rounded shapes that looked architectural, as though the snow were making decisions. It lay on the moss-covered stone lanterns in the lower garden with the proprietorial completeness of something that had been there before the lanterns and would be there after them. It muffled the sound of the valley below until the world contracted to the immediate, to the smell of cedar and cold air and wood smoke from the kitchen, to the creak of the floorboards in the corridor that connected the monks' hall to the meditation hall, to the breath rising from the faces of the practitioners during the early morning sitting as small clouds that disappeared in the cold. Rioan had come to Bankei at 25, from a merchant family in Kyoto that had expected him to spend his life doing what merchant families in Kyoto expected their sons to do. He had left without drama, without particular conflict, with a letter of explanation that he had rewritten 4 times and which his father had read, folded carefully, and placed in the lacquered box where he kept documents that required future consideration. His mother had given him extra sandals. His younger sister had cried in a way that had stayed with him longer than he expected. He had been at Bankei for 2 years, learning the precise choreography of monastic life, how to hold the bowls at meals, how to move through the corridors in a way that was neither hurried nor slow, how to sit for hours in the meditation hall without letting the body's complaints become the mind's occupation, how to listen when Dogen Zenji spoke in the manner the teaching required, not gathering, not storing, but receiving. This last had proved the most difficult. Dogen was 50 years old that winter, and his body was beginning to declare its disagreement with the decades of sitting through cold temples and sustained intensity of practice that had been his life since the age of 13. He moved with the careful deliberation of a man who has learned to pay close attention to what the body reports. And his face, which had the quality of stillness that in younger men looks like tranquility, but in older men reveals itself as something more earned, showed the particular lines of a person who has been genuinely surprised by suffering and has not found it necessary to pretend otherwise. He gave teachings in the main hall each day that were brief but dense. The way certain foods are dense, not large, but requiring long digestion. He did not shout. He did not demonstrate. He spoke in the even tone of someone who has understood something so completely that the urgency of communicating it has resolved into a kind of patient precision. Rioan sat in the back of the hall and listened with the quality of attention he had been developing since his arrival, earnest, genuine, and subtly strained. The strain came from the effort. He was working very hard at listening. He was monitoring his listening to ensure it was good enough. He was trying, in every session, to receive the teaching with the kind of open, unobstructed clarity that the teaching itself was pointing toward. He understood the irony. He had understood it for 8 months. Understanding it had not, on its own, resolved it. The particular morning of this story was a morning in the 3rd month of his 2nd winter. The snow had been falling for 2 days without stopping. The steady, moderate fall that is not a storm but a condition, the sky's considered decision about what the world should look like. Rioan had risen before first light as usual, performed the morning preparations as usual, taken his place in the meditation hall as usual. The hall at Ihg in deep winter was a place where the body's relationship to cold became instructive. The stone floor transmitted it through the cushion in a way that grew, over the course of a long sitting, from discomfort to something more fundamental, a statement from the body about what was real and present, more persuasive than any philosophical argument. The cedar columns darkened with age. The incense smoke moved in the still air with the slow attention of something that had no destination. Outside, the snow continued its 2-day conversation with the temple roofs. Rioan was sitting. He was doing what Dorgan had instructed Shikantaza. Just sitting. Nothing but sitting, which meant releasing the project of attaining something through sitting. Releasing even the observation of whether he was releasing it correctly. Releasing the layer of the observer that checked whether the release was genuine. He had been practicing this release for 2 years. Each morning it went roughly the same way. The first hour earnest and moderately successful. The second hour beginning to involve subtle negotiations with the practice. The third hour producing either a quality of settled attention or a quality of subtle struggle, depending on factors he had not been able to fully identify. This morning, something was different before the first hour was over. Not dramatically, not with any announcement. The difference was so quiet it almost failed to register. Rioan had been sitting with his eyes lowered, in the traditional posture, when he became aware without directing the awareness, without choosing to pay attention to it, of the sound of snow falling on the roof of the meditation hall. This was not a new sound. He had heard it for 2 days. He had registered it as background, filed it in the category of present but irrelevant. Continued sitting. What happened now was not that the sound became louder or more interesting. What happened was subtler. The layer of him that was doing the filing simply wasn't there. The sound arrived. There was no one available to put it anywhere. The snow fell on the roof of the temple with the particular sound that snow makes barely a sound at all. More a quality of presence than an acoustic event. A soft, continuous arrival that was also silence. that was made of silence. That was what silence sounds like when it is not absent of sound, but full of it. The sound of a world delivering itself continuously to a present moment that had no one in it to receive it as a project. Rioan was present, but not as a project, not as a practitioner working on receiving, just present. The way the hall was present, the way the snow was present, with the simple factuality of things that exist in this moment, without commentary about whether their existence is proceeding correctly. For the duration of several breaths, he could not have said how many. Since there was no one counting, the body sat, and the snow fell, and the cold occupied the space between the cedar columns, and the butter lamp burned its small steady light, and none of it required anything of any part of him. And he required nothing of any part of it. Then the session bell rang. The monks moved. The world reassembled into the practical. Rioan sat for a moment after the others had begun to rise. He sought Dogen that afternoon in the interval between the midday meal and the afternoon practice period, which was one of the few times the teacher received private visitors. He had brought a question to Dogen before each time, with the particular combination of preparation and nervousness that characterized the approach to a teacher whose precision was known to be exactly as gentle as it was exact. He had received, each time, answers that required weeks of sitting to begin to open. He sat across from Dogen in the small room that looked out on the garden, where the snow had created a complete whiteness that made it difficult to tell where the garden ended and the sky began. He said, "I want to describe what happened in the sitting this morning, but I find I can't. The moment I try to form it into words, something changes." Dogen looked at him. He said, "What changes? It becomes something I had. A memory. A description of an experience. Not the thing itself." Dogen nodded slowly, with the nod of someone who has heard this particular account in several hundred forms and has never found it less interesting. "What was the sound you heard?" "Snow on the roof." "And who heard it?" Rioan was quiet. When the snow arrived, Dogen said, "And the one who usually receives the snow was not there. Did the snow arrive well? Did anything go wrong?" "Nothing went wrong," Rioan said slowly. In fact, he stopped, because the sentence did not have a good ending. Dogen finished it for him, not as a completion, but as a pointing. In fact, the snow arrived more completely. "Yes," said Rioan. "This is what the ancestors called body-mind dropping off." Dogen said, "Not the elimination of the body or the mind. The dropping off of the layer that positions itself between experience and the one who is having the experience. The self that supervises. The one who makes sure listening is happening correctly." He paused. Snow was still falling outside the window, patient and continuous. When that layer drops, even for a moment, what is left? "Just the sitting," said Rioan. "Just the snow. Just the sound. Just the sitting," said Dogen. "Just the snow. Just the sound." He repeated it the way he repeated things that were worth repeating, with the quality of a teacher who is not explaining but pointing. This is what we mean when we say practice and enlightenment are one. Not that sitting produces enlightenment as a result, but that sitting, done in this way, the body present, the mind present, the self not obstructing this sitting, is already the activity of Buddha. The snow falls. The hearing happens. There is nothing to add. Rioan bowed. He returned to the meditation hall for the afternoon sitting. He sat. The snow continued. He did not try to recreate the morning. He did not try to avoid trying to recreate it. He simply sat, and when the self-supervisor appeared as it did, regularly, honestly, without apology, he did not argue with it. He returned, as Dogen had said to return 1,000 times, simply to sitting. The snow fell. Dogen died 3 years later, in 1253, at the age of 53, of a long illness that he bore with the equanimity of someone for whom impermanence had been the subject of daily contemplation for 40 years rather than an abstract teaching. His death poem has been preserved, 54 years lighting up the sky. A quivering leap smashes 1 billion worlds. Entire body looks for nothing. Living, I plunge into yellow springs. Rioan was at Aihayi when Dogen died. He stood in the courtyard in the winter cold and felt the grief without managing it, which is what he had been taught to feel what was present, fully, without adding to it the project of feeling it correctly. He continued to practice at Aihayi for the next 30 years. He never, in all that time, tried to recreate the morning with the snow on the roof. And he never, in all that time, forgot what it had pointed toward, not as a memory to hold, but as a direction to face. In the Soto tradition of Dogen, the teaching of shikantaza, just sitting, is sometimes described as the most complete listening available to a human being. Not listening with the ears alone. Not listening as a directed act of attention. Listening with the whole body-mind, without the posture of the one who is listening. Just the sitting. Just the being here. The cedar and the cold and the snow on the roof. Arriving into an awareness that is present without being occupied. Open without being empty. Awake without trying to be. Right now, your body is doing something like this without your direction. The breath is moving. The heart is beating. The room is holding you with the quiet competence of rooms that have been holding sleeping people for longer than any of us can remember. And there is hearing. Not listening you are doing. Hearing that is happening, the sounds of this voice, the sounds of your room, perhaps some far sound from outside, carrying across the night to wherever you are. All of it arriving, none of it requiring anything. Let the supervisor rest. The one who monitors whether you are relaxing properly, whether you are following the instructions, whether tonight's sleep will be adequate. Let that layer grow thin and thinner still, until there is just the weight of the body, just the warmth of the blanket, just the breath moving in its ancient, reliable way. Just this moment, just this breath. The snow falls. The hearing happens. Nothing to add. And as that simplicity settles into the bones like warmth settling into stone, like stillness settling into a room that has finally been allowed to be quiet, we make our last short journey of this night. To no tradition in particular, to no country, to no century. Just a river at night. Just water. Just the sound of moving water on its way to wherever moving water goes. And you, resting on its banks, already home. There was a woman in the Song dynasty city of Hangzhou who had, by the time she was 40 years old, become very good at pretending she could hear. Her name was Ling, which meant something like bright or clear in the manner that running water is clear transparency as a virtue rather than a lack. She had grown up in a merchant household where her father dealt in silk, which meant she had grown up understanding that the surfaces of things were significant, the weight and sheen of cloth, the way light traveled across it, the difference between colors that announced themselves and colors that revealed themselves slowly to a careful eye. Her father had taught her to see this way. He had not taught her to listen. Listening in Ling's household meant something like receiving information and acting on it efficiently. When her father spoke, the household listened and moved. When her mother organized the kitchen, the servants listened and arranged. When the buyers from the northern provinces visited and spoke about prices and quantities and delivery dates, everyone listened with the bright, focused attention of people to whom information was currency. This kind of listening she understood. She was excellent at it. What she had never been taught, and what she had never discovered on her own, was the other kind. She had suspected the other kind existed, in the way that people suspect the existence of things that are named but not explained. The sutras spoke of Guan Shiyin, the one who perceives the sounds of the world, as though perceiving sounds was something different from hearing them, as though there was a quality of attention available to hearing that her busy, information-gathering, efficient attention had never fully accessed. She had chanted the name. She had lit incense at the Guanyin shrine near the Eastern Market, as women in Hangzhou did, with the practical faith of people who understand that some things are beyond their own management and require the assistance of someone with better reach. She had received, in return, what such faith tends to receive, the mild comfort of having completed a meaningful act, and a return to ordinary life. This was sufficient until her husband died. He died in the winter of her 40th year, of a fever that the physician had first assessed as minor and then, as it failed to resolve, had reassessed in ways that moved steadily toward the honest conclusion. He had been a trader in lacquerware, a calm man who made decisions without unnecessary deliberation and who laughed at his own mistakes with a sincerity that Ling had found. Over 20 years, both admirable and occasionally infuriating, he had died in the afternoon, with the sound of the canal traffic coming through the window of their upper room and Ling holding his hand and the physician waiting in the corridor with the particular stillness of someone who has delivered enough bad news to have learned the appropriate posture for it. What followed was practical. The household continued. The children, 3, the youngest still at home, were managed. The business was transferred to her eldest son with the thoroughness that Ling's father had taught her about all transfers. She was not someone who stopped functioning, but something had stopped. Not grief. Exactly. Though grief was present, something quieter than grief. The silence of a room that has had sound in it for 20 years and now does not. The particular way that absence has shape. She would be managing accounts or organizing cloth samples and become aware, mid-task, of a quality of listening that had nowhere to go. Like an ear turned toward a voice that had stopped speaking, sustained and purposeless at once. She began going to the Guanyin temple. The temple outside the south gate of Hangzhou had a meditation hall that opened early in the morning before the light fully arrived. The resident nun, an elderly woman named Miao Yuan, received visitors with the equanimity of someone who has been receiving visitors for a long time and has learned that the reasons people arrive are rarely the reasons they think they arrive. She looked at Ling the first morning and said, "What are you here to find?" Ling said, with the directness of a woman who had spent 40 years doing business. "I don't know. Something that would help me understand what happened." Miao Yuan said, "Sit down." Ling sat on the meditation cushion in the small hall that smelled of sandalwood and winter air. with the sound of early traffic from the canal reaching her faintly through the paper screens, and tried to do what she understood sitting to be, sitting quietly with the intention of receiving insight. Nothing arrived in the form she expected. What arrived was noise. Not the canal traffic. Internal noise, the full inventory of her mind's concerns, its unfinished assessments of the household, its replaying of the weeks preceding her husband's death, its quiet monitoring of whether she was sitting correctly and whether this was helping, and whether grief was supposed to feel like this, and whether she was managing it appropriately. The usual, the very efficient machinery of a mind that had been trained to process information and had not, in 40 years, been asked to do anything else. After 2 weeks of this, she returned to Miao Yuan and said, "I can't make it stop." Miao Yuan said, with the tone of someone who has answered this question in most of its available forms, "What is it? The thinking? The managing? You have been managing things for 40 years. Yes. And now? Now there is nothing to manage. The household runs. The children are grown. My husband is dead. There is nothing that requires." She stopped, because the sentence had not finished itself in the way she expected. Miao Yuan waited. "There is nothing that requires this kind of attention," Ling said slowly, "and I don't know what else to do with it." Miao Yuan said, "Come back tomorrow. I will read you something." The passage Miao Yuan read was from the Shurangama Sutra, the section in which Guanyin Bodhisattva describes the method of practice through which her enlightenment was realized. Miao Yuan read it in the plain, unhurried way she read everything, without performance, without commentary in her voice. I began with a practice based on the enlightened nature of hearing. First, I redirected my hearing inward in order to enter the current of the sages. Then external sounds disappeared, with the direction of my hearing reversed and with sounds stilled. Both sounds and silence ceased to arise. She paused. The sound of the canal came through the screens. A bird called once from the garden and was quiet. She continued, advancing in this way. Both hearing and what was heard melted away and vanished. When hearing and what is heard are both forgotten, then the sense of hearing leaves no impression on the mind. When sense and the objects of sense both become empty, then emptiness and sense merge and reach a state of absolute perfection. Miao Yuan closed the text. Ling sat with it. Then she said, "I don't understand how this is done." "No," said Miao Yuan. "You don't understand how it is stopped being done. You have been turning hearing outward your entire life, gathering information, managing, assessing, deciding. The practice Guanyin describes is the reversal of that direction. Instead of hearing going out to meet sounds and bring them back as information, hearing turns and recognizes itself. The ear that has been listening to the world turns to listen to the listening. How? Go to the coast, said Miao Yuan simply. Find waves. Let them teach you. There was a rocky promontory 2 days' walk south of Hangzhou, where the sea came in from the east and struck the exposed headland without the softening of a harbor. Ling went there in late spring, when the water was cold and clear and the wind had a quality of undirected purpose, going where the topography asked it to go without arguing. She brought 3 days' worth of rice and dried fish and the determination of a merchant's daughter who understood that investment required patience. She sat on a flat stone above the waterline and listened to the waves. This was, for the first hours, the same efficient listening she had always done, receiving the information of the waves, categorizing it, noticing the pattern of rise and break and recede, noting when the pattern varied, filing the smell of the spray and the cold of the wind in the appropriate category of sensory data that did not require action. By the second hour, something had begun to change. Not through effort, through the simple impossibility of maintaining efficient management of something that had no beginning and no end, and offered no information that required any response. The waves came. The waves went. The spray rose and fell. The sound built and subsided and built again with the perfect indifference of something that had been doing this since before there were people to hear it and would continue after the last person stopped. There was nothing to do with any of it. And in the absence of anything to do, in the growing recognition that no efficient management was possible or required, the machinery of Ling's attention began, for the first time in 40 years, to rest. Not stop. Rest. The way a hand rests when it is neither holding nor reaching. She began hearing the waves without any agenda for the information. The sound arrived. Simply arrived. Without Ling already knowing what it meant or what she should do about it. Without the rapid assessment of significance that her mind had applied to every incoming perception since childhood. Just the sound, in the air, reaching whatever it reached. And something she could not have named, something prior to naming. Prior to the long-practiced habit of knowing what things were before she finished hearing them, received it. On the third day, she sat from before dawn until the sun had crossed well past its height. And something occurred that she would spend the rest of her life attempting to describe with only partial success. The sound of the waves, which she had been receiving without agenda for 2 days, became at some point indistinguishable from the hearing of them. Not in the sense that she could no longer tell the difference between the sound and the silence, but in the deeper sense that the distinction between the wave and the ear, between the thing heard and the one hearing that distinction, which had seemed as fundamental as the distinction between her body and the stone she sat on, lost its sharpness. The boundary grew soft, permeable. There was hearing. Whether there was a hearer separate from the herd, this had ceased to be a question she could answer, or needed to answer, or that the experience required an answer to. This lasted an indeterminate time. She became aware of it, ending in the way you become aware of a dream ending, not dramatically, but through the gradual reassertion of ordinariness. She was a woman on a stone above the sea. The waves continued. The light had moved significantly. Her back ached. But something had changed in the way that some changes are permanent, not because they cannot be undone, but because they reveal something that was always present and cannot now be unknown. The sound of the waves was still outside her. And also it was simply continuous with whatever she was, not merged in a mystical sense. Just not fundamentally separate in the way she had always assumed. She sat for a long time after that, not doing anything in particular, which was itself unusual. She returned to Miao Yuan and described what had happened as accurately as she could, which was approximately 50% as accurately as it had actually occurred, because the other 50% had no language yet. Miao Yuan listened with the attention of someone who has heard these descriptions before and always finds them interesting in their particularity. When Ling finished, the nun said, "You heard yourself hearing." "Yes." "And Guanyin?" Ling was quiet for a moment. Then she said, slowly, "The name means the one who perceives the sounds, not the one who makes the sounds go away. Not the one who achieves the absence of sound. The one who perceives them completely, without the gap between the perceiver and the perceived." Miao Yuan nodded. "This is why compassion follows naturally. When you truly hear without a gap, when you receive the sound of another person's suffering without the layer of management and assessment and deciding what to do about it, that suffering is simply received completely, without obstruction. And what receives completely, responds completely. This is Guanyin. This is what the name means. Ling considered this for a long time in the quiet of the meditation hall. Then she said, "My husband's voice. If I could hear it now, really hear it, without all the things I overlay onto it, I think I would hear something I missed for 20 years. Yes," said Miao Yuan simply. That is grief and love meeting without obstruction. That is where they become the same thing. The teaching of Guanyin is perhaps the oldest teaching in this collection of stories, and perhaps the simplest. It is this: hearing, taken all the way to its depth, becomes the same as compassion. When the gap closes, when the one who hears and the thing heard are no longer separated by the membrane of management and assessment and the efficient machinery of a mind that has been trained to turn everything into information, what remains is not absence. What remains is contact. Real, unmediated, complete contact. Guanyin means the one who perceives the sounds of the world, not the one who filters them, not the one who analyzes them, not the one who hears them and immediately knows what to do about them, the one who perceives them openly, completely, without obstruction. The one whose hearing is so complete that the sound and the hearing are one gesture. This is what you have been moving toward tonight. Through all these journeys across traditions and centuries and mountains and rivers and caves and gardens and meditation halls. This is the listening life. Right now, in this room, in this body, sounds are present. Perhaps this voice, perhaps the sounds of wherever you are, a creak of wood, the movement of air, the faint suggestion of the world continuing its business outside your walls. Perhaps the sound of your own breathing, which is always present and always available and has never once asked you to do anything with it except receive it. Receive it now, without the membrane of management, without the efficient machinery that tries to turn the breath into information about how well you are sleeping or how relaxed you are or whether tonight's practice is working. Just the breath arriving, the sound of it arriving, the warmth of it, the slight sound of the release, the hearing and the heard, resting in the same open space. This is Guanyin's method, and it has never, for a single moment, been unavailable to you. Let the sounds of your room arrive into that openness now. Let them come without agenda. Let them pass without pursuit. The way the waves came to the woman on the stone above the sea and found in her an openness so complete that they were simply received, completely, without the gap. The sound of this night, the sound of your breathing, the sound of everything that is still here with you in this moment. Received, complete. Now let the body grow heavier. Let the eyes, if they have not already closed, to be allowed to close now. Let the breath slow and deepen on its own, which it has been trying to do all along, waiting only for you to stop managing it. One final journey remains. It asks nothing of you. It requires no attention, no effort, no understanding. It only asks you to receive what is already arriving. Just this breath, just this sound, just this moment growing slowly, softly, into the next. There is a river that runs through no particular country, in no particular century. It has been here longer than the names we have given to the water that moves through it, longer than the traditions that have found their way to its banks to sit and practice and wonder and rest. Its source is somewhere in the mountains high, cold, the kind of elevation where the rock is exposed and the snow persists through summer in the shadowed places, and the air has a quality that makes the lungs feel newly made. Its mouth is somewhere in the sea, the great patient body that receives everything, rivers bring and keeps none of it, and loses nothing. Between source and mouth, it moves. This is what rivers do. Not arriving somewhere, not leaving somewhere, moving, which is a different relationship with place than either arriving or leaving. A relationship that doesn't privilege destination, that treats the whole length of itself as equally real and equally present, that is as fully the river in the high cold places as in the wide slow places near the sea. Tonight the river is passing through a stretch of low land where the banks are soft and the trees lean over the water from both sides, their branches meeting above the center channel in a loose canopy that filters the moonlight into broken patterns on the surface. The water here is dark and slow. Not sluggish, there is still current. You can see it in the way certain floating things move with more purpose than the random drift of still water, but unhurried. The river at this point has come a long distance and has a long distance still to go, and has learned, in the manner of things that travel far, not to rush the middle portion. You have found your way here, not through any particular effort, the way people find their way to rivers in dreams, not with a map, not with a plan, but with the simple fact of being here now, on the bank, the grass soft and slightly damp beneath you, the sound of the water reaching you, the way the water has been reaching this bank every night for centuries, without announcement, without asking anything in return. The night is warm enough. This is the kind of warmth that asks nothing of the body, not the warmth that makes you search for shade, not the warmth that requires management. The warmth that simply permits the muscles to release whatever they have been holding through the long day, the long week, the long season of attention and effort and showing up to the next required thing. The warmth that makes the shoulders drop by themselves, without instruction. You have been somewhere before here, many places, perhaps in the course of this long night. There were stories, you may remember some of them, or parts of them, or only a quality of something heard and received. A monk in a rainy garden, once, a stream in the mountains of China, cold stone floors and Japanese winter, the sound of bells in a Vietnamese courtyard where frangipani trees stood in full bloom, a cave in Tibet with wind coming through from the north, a forest in Thailand where the trees were full of insects speaking in the particular frequency of hot countries after dark. These may feel distant now. They are meant to. Everything heard tonight was always moving toward this bank, this river, this warmth, this permission to set down whatever you are still carrying and simply be here. Listen to the river, not to understand it, not to gather information about what kind of river it is, or how fast it moves, or how deep the channel runs at the center. Simply to receive the sound of it, the way the bank receives it without preparation, without the need to do anything in return. The sound of moving water over smooth stone is one of the oldest sounds a human nervous system knows. Not old in the way of history, old in the way of inheritance, something the body remembers in the cells, in the places before language, in the part of us that is continuous with every ancestor who has ever rested by water and felt the particular calming that running water creates in a tired mind. The river is speaking in its own language, which has no words, which does not require translation, which arrives directly into the body below the level of thought. It says something like, here, 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 every moment, here, every moment, the same complete and unhurried here. Let the sound travel all the way in, not just to the ears, down through the throat, into the chest, into the belly, into the soft places in the body that have been braced against the day and do not know yet that the day is over and the bracing can stop. The river says here, and the body begins, cell by cell, to believe it. The moonlight on the water is moving. Not the moon itself. The moon has found a comfortable position above the far bank and has no particular interest in moving before morning. But the reflection of the moon on the river's surface moves the way reflections on moving water always move, continuously breaking and reforming. Never the same configuration twice. Always recognizably light. Always recognizably moving. Never arriving anywhere. You can watch this without effort. Let the eyes, if they are open, simply receive the light on the water the way the water receives it, without grasping at it, without trying to hold the pattern still, without needing the next configuration to resemble the last one. The light breaks. The light reforms. The river keeps moving and the light keeps changing, and nothing is required of you in this. If the eyes have already closed, there is a version of this happening anyway, behind the eyelids. In the particular darkness that is not quite uniform, the slight movements of light that remain when the eyes are closed and the world continues to exist just beyond them. The movement is the same. The permission is the same. You don't have to watch. You don't have to not watch. Simply be here, receiving whatever arrives. There were 8 teachings tonight. 9, if you count the one that just ended. 10, if you count this one though. This one is less a teaching than a rest between teachings. A place where the teachings are absorbed below the surface of knowing, where they do their real work without your supervision. This is how it works with wisdom that comes through listening. It enters below the level of comprehension, below the layer that decides whether it has been understood correctly. It settles into the body the way water settles into soil, not filling the soil from the top, but moving through it gradually, reaching the roots before it reaches the surface, working in darkness, doing what it does without announcement. All the listening of this night, the careful attending, the stories received, the ancient teachers and their ancient discoveries, all of it is moving through you now in the same gradual way. You do not need to hold it. You do not need to review it. You do not need to make sure you absorb the correct things in the correct proportion. The river will carry it. The body already holds it. The cells have already received it. Let the mind stop reviewing. Let the mind stop. Just stop. Not forever. Just for now. Just for these hours between tonight and morning, during which something in you knows exactly what to do and does not need the mind's supervision. The frogs along this stretch of river have been calling since before you arrived. They are calling now. A low, steady percussion from the banks on both sides, not a single voice but the aggregate of many, overlapping and interlocking, so dense and continuous that it functions less as individual sound than as a quality of the night itself. The way certain sounds become the background against which other sounds appear. Except that this sound is so complete, it has become the foreground too. The middle ground. Everything, the river and the frogs and the moonlight on the water and the warm air and the soft grass and the weight of the body settling further into the earth. Listen to the frogs without needing them to mean anything. They are not teaching tonight. They are simply calling, as they call every warm night along this and every other river, as they have been calling for longer than any of the traditions visited tonight can name. They call because this is what they do. Their calling has never been for an audience. You happen to be here to receive it, which is a kind of grace, which requires no more response than the grass's response to rain's simple receiving. Simple absorption. Simple gratitude that has no need to articulate itself. The sound enters the body. The body softens around the sound. There is no distance between you and the frogs. Really. There is air. And through the air moves the compression that we call sound. And the compression reaches the body. And the body is moved by it, literally, at the level of the eardrum, which moves in response to what the world is doing. The world is calling. The body is receiving. This has been happening every moment of every night of your life, mostly without your awareness, always without your effort. Let it happen tonight without your awareness. Let the sounds arrive and move through you and continue on their way. The way the river moves through the night landscape, not stopping because it is noticed, not changing course because someone is watching, simply moving. Somewhere upstream, earlier tonight, there was rain. You can know this from the smell of the water, that particular quality that water takes on when it has received recent rain, carrying the scent of the earth that the rain passed through on its way to the river, carrying something that is both ancient and immediate. That is the smell of the world reconstituting itself after being washed. Breathe it in, not as a practice, not as an instruction. Simply notice that you are breathing, and that the air you are receiving contains this, the smell of recent rain on upland soil, carried down through the watershed to arrive at this particular bend of the river, at this particular hour of this particular night. You are receiving something that has traveled to reach you. The breath comes in, carrying what the night air carries. The breath goes out, carrying what the body gives back. This exchange has been happening continuously since before you knew what a breath was. It will continue tonight while you sleep. It requires nothing from you. It has never required anything from you. The body breathes. The world provides what the breathing needs. This is the oldest agreement, renewed every few seconds. Never discussed, never broken. Rest in the agreement. Let the body breathe and be breathed. Let the night air arrive and the night air depart. Let the river move. Let the frogs call. Let the moon hold its position above the far bank with the unassuming steadiness of something that has been here much longer than tonight and has learned not to make a fuss about it. You are growing heavier. Not the heaviness of burden. The heaviness of something that has arrived where it was going, the weight that gathers when the body finally accepts the invitation of gravity that has been extended all day without response. The earth beneath you is real and patient. It has been waiting for this weight all day without impatience. The grass between the body and the earth is soft, accepting, making the contact easy. The warmth of the night has made the body pliable, receptive, less insistent on maintaining its usual slight distance from everything. Let the body settle into the ground. Let the ground receive the body. Feel the contact, the specific weight of the hips against the earth, the particular softness where the shoulder meets the grass, the way the back of the head finds its resting place with the ease of something that has been looking for exactly this support for many hours and has finally found it. Nothing is required of you from this position. Nothing is possible from this position except rest and the reception of what the night continues to offer, the sound of the river, the calling of the frogs, the passage of the moonlight on the water, the warm air moving in and moving out, the smell of upland rain traveling downstream to reach you exactly when you needed it. Let the eyes be closed now. If they are not, let the face be soft, the jaw, the space around the eyes, the small muscles of the forehead that have been active all day, processing and assessing and expressing and deciding. Let them remember that they are muscles, that muscles have a resting state, that the resting state is their natural condition when nothing is required of them. Nothing is required of them now. Let the hands be open, palms upward or turned toward the earth, whatever position requires the least holding. The hands have held things all day. They can rest now in the simple factual openness of hands that have nothing to carry. Let the feet be still. Let the legs rest with their full weight on the earth. Both of them, the left and the right, symmetrical and heavy and quiet. The body is resting. All of it is resting. The river is still moving. The frogs are still calling. The moon has not gone anywhere. The night continues to be warm and soft and patient. None of this requires your supervision. There will be a morning. It will arrive the way mornings arrive at rivers, the first pale suggestion in the east. The birds beginning before the light is sufficient to warrant waking. The water going from black to grey to the particular blue-green of river water in early light. The frogs quieting as the temperature shifts and the night creatures make their way back to wherever night creatures go. You don't need to be awake for this. The morning will handle itself, as mornings always have. Tonight is for rest. Tonight is for the body to do what it does in the deep hours, the repair and integration that happens below awareness, the consolidation of everything the day held, the release of everything the day required, the gradual return to something that is simply a person breathing near a river in the dark. If thoughts arise, let them. They will pass the way sounds pass arriving, present for their moment, departing. You do not need to follow them. You do not need to argue with them. You do not need to make sure they are the right thoughts. They are just thoughts, moving through the awareness the way clouds move through the sky above this river, neither asked for nor refused, neither held nor chased. Let them pass. Let the breath continue. Let the river continue. Somewhere in the teachings of tonight, in the reign of Savatthi, in the stream in Jiangxi, in a cold hut in Japan, or a hermitage on a Korean mountain, or a garden in Vietnam, or a cave in Tibet, or a forest in Thailand, or snow on a temple roof, or waves on a rocky shore, there was a common thread so thin and so consistent it was easy to miss. The thread was this: something is always already listening. Not you, working at it. Not the trained practitioner, applying technique. Something prior to all of that, the bare openness that is present before thought, before effort, before the self that supervises arrives to make sure listening is happening correctly. The awareness that was here before the first word of this night was spoken. The awareness that will be here when the last sound fades into the silence from which it came. This awareness does not need to be cultivated. It does not need to be protected. It does not need to be maintained across the transition into sleep. It will be here in the morning. It was here before you were born. It does not sleep, and so you can. Let the breath slow. Let the spaces between breaths grow longer, not through effort, not through holding, but through the simple fact that a body growing deeply at rest does not need to breathe as often as a body that is vigilant and awake. Let the river be your breath. Let the in-breath be the wave rising. Let the out-breath be the wave withdrawing into the sea. Let the pause between them be the moment when the wave has completed its arriving and has not yet begun its returning, that moment of absolute stillness at the height of the wave, before the water decides its direction. Rest in that pause. Rest in the moment between arriving and departing. This is where sleep comes from. This is the doorway the body knows how to use on its own. If you stop standing in it, step back. Let the body through. The river moves. The frogs call, or have grown quiet. It no longer matters which. The moon continues across the sky with the patient confidence of something that has made this journey many thousands of times and finds it sufficient. The grass holds the weight of the body with the uncomplicated acceptance of earth receiving what falls to it. The breath continues. In, out, in, out. The sound of the river is everywhere and nowhere. The way the sound of the ocean is everywhere and nowhere, when you have been near it long enough, no longer a sound arriving from outside, but a quality of the world itself, a condition of being here, something received so completely it has stopped being received and simply become what is. This is what the listening life arrives at. In the end, not a practice, not an achievement, not even a teaching, just this, just the sound of the world being what it is. In the darkness, near water, while the body rests and the breath moves, and whatever you are beneath the stories, beneath the teachings, beneath the long effort of the day simply is. You are already here. You have always been here. Rest. All the journeys of tonight across centuries and traditions, across mountains and rivers, through rain and snow and wind and silence, they have brought you to this place that you never left. The teaching was always about this moment. The listening was always leading here. You don't need to understand this. You don't need to remember this. The wisdom of tonight will work in you the way water works in the earth quietly, without your supervision. Reaching the roots. This recording offers contemplative stories inspired by Buddhist wisdom, created for rest and reflection. If any of what you heard tonight touched something real in you, trust that touch. It does not need to be named. If you found some ease tonight, some softening, some permission to let the mind grow quiet, consider sharing this with someone who might also need rest. There is a subscribe button that will bring more of these journeys to you, though you are under no obligation to seek anything further tonight. May your sleep be deep and untroubled. May you wake having received what you needed, even if you do not know what that was. May the river continue. May the breath continue. May whatever is already listening in you know that it has done its work tonight, completely, without error. Rest now. Good night. Tonight, you traveled far without leaving this room. You walked with Ananda through monsoon rains in ancient India, learning that the most faithful hearing is the hearing that allows itself to be changed. You stood with Dongshan at a stream bank in Tang Dynasty, China, and felt what it means to receive a sound before the mind has finished naming it. You sat in the cold dark of a Japanese winter with Bankei Yotaku, discovering that the mind searching for stillness and the mind itself are not the same thing. You carried a wordless question through the mountain monasteries of Korea, learning that the question, held long enough without forcing an answer, becomes a kind of freedom. You heard a bell in a Vietnamese courtyard and understood for a moment, what it means to come home without having gone anywhere. You sat in a Tibetan cave while the wind described something that no teacher could have said in words. You rested in the forest with Ajahn Chah and found that you are the sky, not the weather. You heard snow falling on a temple roof in Aiheiji and understood that practice and enlightenment are not two different things. You sat with a grieving woman on a rocky shore in Song Dynasty China while the waves did the teaching. And at the end of it all, you arrived at a river that has no name, in a night that has no century, and found that you had never left. The thread through all of it was the same thread. Something is always already listening. Not practicing listening, not working at it. Already listening, the bare, open awareness that was present before the first word tonight, that received everything without being asked to, that will carry you into sleep without requiring your permission or your supervision. This is what a listening life is. Not a life of more careful attending, a life of more complete receiving. These reflections are contemplative in nature, offered for rest and reflection, and are not a substitute for professional care of any kind. If tonight brought you some ease, please consider sharing this channel with someone who might also need rest. And if you would like more journeys like this one, a quiet subscription helps more people find their way here. But that is for another moment. This moment is only for rest. The awareness that heard everything tonight is still here. It does not sleep, and so you can. Good night.